just in general misbehave, and so here we are. I apologized in advance if this starts out incredibly quiet or there's some other massive problem going on here. I don't know how this is going to go, but we're going to try it anyway, just in the hopes that it all behaves itself. I have done some shady things like this in the past, and they did in fact work, as it appears they are working now. So, finally, hooray, things behave themselves. Somehow we're not late and gay. Somehow we are indeed early. So, sorry about that for all of you who are having to... Holy boomer Mike, that's a super good sign. Well, YouTube chat, go ahead. Oh, my audio is blown out. Whoop. All right, YouTube chat. Oh, man. Okay, so let's return this to where it was. Your audio is blown out. Feel full ear rape mode. Okay, Chad, how are we doing now? As is tradition, if we're going to be early, we got to break everything and make it all terrible. So I'm just going to sit here for a minute while audio finishes fixing itself. I don't know. Rumble? YouTube? Anybody? Bueller? I don't know. We'll get through the delay in a moment. So, for those of you wondering how it is that those things come to pass, some software, namely Discord, does not work very well, and so you can't adjust your audio in any reasonable way. And so whenever it is that I interact with Discord, if I forget to fix how I have broken my audio input, that sorts of thing happens. Audio is better now. Perfect. All right. So, sorry, dear YouTube, you're going to end up putting up with that for another few seconds. I am, again, just rebroadcasting this stream straight off of Rumble to you. I'm sure that's a violation of the TOS somehow. I don't know how. I'm probably breaking my own copyright or something, and so YouTube's going to claim my own content on behalf of me because that's how YouTube is. Now, with that in mind, hypothetically, we're going to roll back to some very, very old content production kind of things. I caught an interview with John Gentry on the Shawn Ryan Show, and as I was listening to it, I thought to myself, man, this is prime content for the good old days. I am told it's called e-fapping. I don't know. But reviewing somebody else's content, and for those of you who were not around for that sort of thing, no, this is not. I just sit here and make funny faces at somebody else's content. I know that's very popular. There are things in here that are worth discussing, in my opinion. This is probably going to take a really long time. That's part of why those of us who used to do this don't do it anymore. That said, the other reason that we're doing this, outside of hopefully good content reasons, is that I have a lot of legal fees all of a sudden. Yes, I was arrested in relation to January 6th. Yes, I am being prosecuted regardless of what the internet will tell you. Yes, I understand. I am not currently in prison. Therefore, something, we all know they're not charging him, or whatever silliness is going around the internet. They are charging me. There's a video about it on Rumble, YouTube. I understand you didn't get this video. Sorry about that. I intended to upload it to you. I just forgot. So, through any number of times over here, what we're going to be doing is coming over to something that looks just like this and saying, hey, if you would like to donate to the Don the Pleb Legal Fund, because the FBI and the Department of Justice over in Washington, D.C. are in fact persecuting, yes, that is correct, persecuting, not prosecuting, any number of people for things in relation to January 6th. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to be kind of vague about this because legal reasons, but it is the case. By all means, links are in the description. If you are listening to this somewhere third party and it gets clipped, and by all means, clip away. The fundraiser is givesendgo.com/donthepleb. So please go over there, donate. I will at least intermittently try to get to what the donations are, answer questions over there, all those other kinds of great things that should be happening during a fundraiser. So with that in mind, hopefully, hypothetically, we will get to some maybe decent content. I don't know. We'll find out. I'm sure, as chat is already informing me, that it's terrible. It's just the worst, and whatever other silly things that chat likes to say at times like these. So, with that in mind, let's see if we can get this to behave itself, because for some reason, intermittently, my browser here likes to just throw things out the window and go absolutely nuts. Sorry about that. Traditional boomerish problems. What are you going to do? Once again, if audio is completely blown out, please tell me, and we'll see what we can do to fix it. That in mind, let's go.
John Gentry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We have a variety of topics we're going to talk about here today. Your new book, Neutering the CIA, the Polarization of the Intelligence Organizations. And but what I'd like to kick it off with is, and what I was really excited to talk to you about other than that, is propaganda. I've been talking about it for a while.
Thank you, chat. I appreciate the relatively quick review. First things first, I think discussing propaganda is probably a good idea. I've done a lot of discussing of propaganda over the years. For those of you who think that's going to go anything like I did, it's going to be different.
I'm not the greatest at explaining how it works and things to look out for, but I think you would be. And so I'd like to kind of kick it off with that. But before everybody gets an introduction here. So let me know if I'm missing anything. Quite the intro.
So pay attention to this. There is going to be two things that happen, and Shawn calls out one of them immediately. Yes, they're both agency guys, therefore we know this is all propaganda, blah, blah, blah. Bump it up. Very well noted. Can do. They're both agency guys. Those guys are going to have kind of agency opinions and all these other kinds of things. See, it's already happening in chat. There it is. And that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that you should change the internet's view of you have worked for the CIA, therefore you're part of the conspiracy to end the world and blah blah blah. And that's fine. Believe that if you'd like. That's not what we're covering here today. There are, in fact, discussions that are had here that are worth paying some attention to and listening to. Now, that in mind, again, listen to this guy's resume. Think whatever you want of that resume, but pay attention to it. At least know who you're listening to.
Dr. John Gentry, PhD in political science and a BA in history, retired U.S. Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel, duties mainly in intelligence and special operations arenas. Former intelligence analyst at Central Intelligence Agency. You're a frequent writer on intelligence and national security issues, author of Neutering the CIA, Why the U.S. Intelligence versus Trump Has Long-Term Consequences. Co-authored Strategic Warning Intelligence, History, Challenges, and Prospects, and has published about 40 articles on intelligence topics. We were talking about some of those on the way here. Frequent public speaker on intelligence issues, former Army Special Forces soldier, and current adjunct professor at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, and teaches for the School of Defense and Strategic Studies at Missouri State University.
Okay, so it's going to be less than surprising that a lot of this is going to come out academic, right? Because that's what this man has moved over to doing. And personally, I think he's going to demonstrate a lot of why it is that listening to academics causes problems. But hey, there's plenty of e-drama out there for you to go dig up if you so choose on that front. But no less, what we're going to get is some kind of academic analysis of what's going on here from high-speed, low-drag operator-type guy, right? Okay. with that in mind, again, I know, dear internet, that no small part of the fun here will be to say, but like, oh my God, he's, what is it the chat's got here? Because I might as well just quote you already. He was an attack dog for banker wars, just like Mike Glover when he was asking for people's social security numbers in 2020. Okay, fine. I'm not telling you to trust the guy. I'm telling you to pay attention to what's being said. Now, I know that the internet is not very interested in that. We all like to have these heuristic answers that go something like, well, I hate you, so I don't have to listen to you, so see how that's... is substantially easy for me. And that's your prerogative. You may do so. One of the many things that I've told you over the years is pay attention to what the enemy is saying. So even if you think either or both of these guys are the enemy, you should be paying attention to what they're saying. I know that is less fun than dunking on them and calling it a day. But one, and so you all know, I am not coming at this from the position that either of these guys are the enemy. I know that is anathema on the internet. Once someone has decided anyone is the enemy, then everyone must decide that person is the enemy. And so that's terrible. I'm used to it. You guys are going to, any number of those people are going to come to me and tell me that I'm the enemy because of any number of their favorite reasons. So by all means, pile on, come down. Hate watch. It's good for channel metrics. Thanks.
Am I missing anything?
No.
All right.
Points.
But I have a subscription service that we offer to our top supporters called Patreon. And so I allow them to ask each guest one question. And so this question is from David Crosby. Do you feel Russia is acting with China or vice versa on a majority of our headlines?
Well, it appears that they're working together on some. My interpretation here is that Russia's got its own agenda. China clearly has an agenda too. I think with respect to Ukraine, for example, and Russian information operations, we'll talk about. They're operating pretty much on their own.
Okay, so you don't think they're connected in their propaganda wars?
Not that I see.
Okay, so again, why I'm here for the chain smoking? I got you. Why is it worth paying attention to even just this? Okay, so it's an interesting thought that they're not connected unto itself, in my opinion, right? Clearly, the two of them are working together. At some point, they are going to have overlapping interest, at least insofar as BRICS is concerned. The quantity of propaganda that is on the internet in relation to BRICS, and they will, in fact, get to BRICS later, but we're going to go through this in the same way that I saw it and how I saw it, right? The quantity of things related to BRICS and how it's taking over the world, and they'll discuss it in just that fashion, right? If you don't think at least some of that is propaganda, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's pretty clear that two large governments who don't like the United States government, right, wrong, or otherwise for that, are in fact going to release information that says, hey, we're winning. That's how propaganda works. All of you know this when it is the U.S. government. When somebody said previously, we're winning in Iraq or Afghanistan, and all the vets are coming home like, well, look, man, we're winning the battles, but like you set the objective as a guaranteed loss condition, so are we winning? And no, those are two different things. And very clearly, post the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we're not winning on the win condition for the U.S. government, right? This is one of those things that's been covered many times on this channel. You want to go win in Afghanistan, just show up, break things, let the military do what it does, and then say, if you never want this to happen again, then don't fuck with me. Now, you don't have to like that. You can think that's a great recipe for war crimes if you'd like, but if you want to use the military to do these things, let the military do what it does. And by the way, you should accept that should mean judicious use of the military, not let's just go wander wherever we want, whenever we want, because what the hell, we'll turn them all, the entire Army, Marine Corps, Navy, etc., into local police, and that's just going to work out, because it doesn't, because they're a military, not a police force. Anyhow, moving along.
Not that I see. They both are using techniques that the Soviets developed, but they've got their own agendas, and their techniques are different in some respects.
Okay. Well, there you have it. We don't think they're together. But, let's just move right into the interview. I really want to kick this off with talking about propaganda. Yeah. So if you could kind of explain, maybe just some basics on how it works and what people can watch out for. Let's start with kind of how it works.
Okay, so what you're trying to do with information operations, propaganda actually is only one element of that. So propaganda would be something that would be fairly obvious in media, brochures, things of that sort. But there's a wide range of
that is an incredible statement to me, and we should cover a few of these things here. One, yes, information operations is not inherently just propaganda. I know the internet likes to shorten information operations to the word propaganda. The statement that this would be fairly obvious. Now, look, if you're watching this channel, I understand there's a very high likelihood that you think it's obvious. If it was this obvious, I don't think it would be working. Maybe that's my opinion. But think about all the things that you have watched be released in the news and gone, that is self-evidently false. I mean, it's almost funny that you would bother to say it out loud, given how ridiculous that is. And no less, certainly being public figure-ish, little tiny public figure. I have had any number of people bring me self-evidently false headlines that they are just banking on being correct. A very specific person from a life long ago brought me the, Don, vets shouldn't like Trump because the Russians put hits out on their heads and Trump didn't care. He didn't do anything about it. And I took one look at the article and went, this is unverified nonsense. This is exactly the same kind of thing that we've seen 30, 40, 50, 1,000 times before. Why are you believing this, right? If something shows up that's confirmation later, maybe we'll talk about whether or not this is real. But right now, this is one article with no sources cited, but you should definitely totes believe. And yet people are running around banking on this like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It proves how much vets should hate Trump and on and on. And that's silly and it's ridiculous. And maybe if you're, this guy right here, that's obviously false. But it's clearly not obviously false to the population at large. Now, you can tell me that that's because they're already propagandized. You can tell me that's because, they're blinded by hatred. You can tell me whatever you want. In the end, it is still true that it is not obvious to them that this is false. You're just giving reasons why it's not obvious to them that it's false. So I don't know that we should bank on that statement, but he does, right? It's clearly false nonsense. No one would believe these things. And yet people believe it, right? Or maybe your assumption is that they're all running around malicious and angry and just trying to figure out a good way. I don't know that that's substantially different, right? The products on the far side it's the same. Moving along.
Other things, forgeries, for example, social media doings. So I prefer to talk about influence operations
So this too is an interesting differentiation, right? And for those of you who have never been here before, we're going to stop a lot because these guys are going to just say stuff that just like, oh, this is just obviously true. You should listen. You should pay attention. And I don't think that's the case, right? So as Chat rightly points out, like brochures, lol, right? Okay. What is the functional difference between a brochure and social media, right? Or news articles and social media? Why are we differentiating the two? And I don't think at any point he ever says, right? Now you can take the anti-gun stance and be like, well, but the First Amendment doesn't regulate modern firearms, to which the 2A community answers immediately like, well, then it doesn't protect social media from the government, right? And I guess whichever side of that argument you come down on tells you, informs you of what the difference is. Like, it's modern, therefore it's not the same. Okay, But, presumably the American response to this is, well, but in any functional way, they are the same, right? A tweet, an X post, a post on Facebook is not substantially different than an 18th century brochure that's being handed out to everybody who asks for one, right? There's not a functional difference there, with the hypothetical exception that, I don't know, it's easier to distribute. Like, is that the issue? Is that where we're getting this defining line? Because if it is, that seems a little silly to me.
Or information operations. The history of this as it pertains to the United States. So if we're thinking about different countries, this would be somewhat different. But as we were talking earlier, the Soviet Union, over a century ago, in the early 1920s, set up information operations that were designed to subvert and ultimately destroy their capitalist opponents. And so that their intelligence services, their foreign ministry, even their national leaders were integrated in these campaigns. One of the foremost of these operators early on was a young German communist by the name of Willy Munzenberg, who organized printing presses, publishing houses.
Okay, so we're gonna stop that for a moment. This is gonna be important later, right? Remember that this guy knows this, and I mean that unironically. He is going to sit here and tell you that, as he just did. I understand how Russian propaganda was created and promulgated, and that it was. I guess to be fair, he doesn't explicitly say that it is a central feature of the Soviet Union, but clearly it is an objective, right? In a foreign policy kind of way, it is sort of a central feature of the Soviet Union. They dedicate a lot of time and energy to this sort of thing. They dedicate a lot of money. He's talking right now about how international attempts are being made to create this propaganda, hey, but one of them big propagandists is the German propagandist, right? Okay, well, how can it be the case that there is this giant international propaganda generation effort and any number of the things that he banks on later? That question is going to become very important.
That would publish material that was consistent with Soviet interests. He also organized groups of various sorts. He divided them into groups that would be roughly homogenous. So there'd be students groups, there'd be professors groups, there'd be women's groups, labor groups, and so on. And they would recruit people under false circumstances, and in essence get these people to push lines and push programs that were consistent with Soviet interests. And Willy called these things innocence clubs because he was able to fool so many people so much of the time. They were innocents, TS at the end. So this is using this word as a noun. Well, the Soviets pushed this very hard through all of their affiliates around the world, through the Communist International, the Comintern. There was a variant of that here in the United States called the Communist Party of the USA, which still exists.
For everybody who wants to call me an incredible Fed, I've been discussing this problem for a long, long time. That's not going away, most likely. In relation to politics, I still maintain that this is one of the greater problems that there are. I know. I just had a friend of mine post something on social media that said, no one cares that this is all communism. And, well, I do. So it's me and, I don't know, you guys. Or you guys minus the people who are here to mock me for believing that. So, I don't know. Whichever it is, that's which it is. So, look, we're laying out here, and rightly so, that this is, at bare minimum, we have covered Russia, Germany, and the United States at this point, right? Where these things are in fact functioning, or at least were at the time that he's discussing. And again, this is going to be important later, so I'm going to hammer the hell out of this point.
still is a Soviet
the Communist Party of the USA?
Yes. Yes. So this was formed, again, a little over 100 years ago, and still exists. And so if you want to look online, actually, you can find a newspaper that they publish every day.
Wow.
People's World. I have a friend, as an aside, I have a friend who has eclectic interests of various sorts, and he looks at conservative press. He also gets a subscription to the Washington Post, and to the Communist Party paper, and he sees very little difference between the Washington Post and the Communist Party paper.
Very interesting.
So they're still operating.
So for those of you who years and years ago would listen to me say, if you're watching this channel, you're probably 10 years ahead of even those who are paying attention, right? We must have covered that back in 2018, give or take. I mean, that's not quite 10 years, but it's 6. None of this, a lot of what he says is not going to be a surprise to you. You're going to be very, hey, this is very obvious. Don, we've been talking about this for years. And now maybe, some of you have pointed out, I have been gone for a couple of years now, and you have all moved on to new brilliant thoughts. Personally, I find lots of those thoughts not brilliant, but we'll get to those in some other stream at some other day. In the meantime, here is your high-speed, low-drag intelligence operator discussing what we were openly discussing 6 years ago. When I tell you that you're ahead of the game, I mean it, right? I know it sounds very full of myself. I know it sounds like, I'm just filleting myself here. But again, things that are becoming a thing right now, if you've been following this channel for a long time, most of a decade at this point, then you already know. There are any number of people, while I was taking a very long break from the internet, sent me like, hey, Don, you're finally, all this stuff is finally becoming mainstream. And it is. And that's good. And I appreciate it. By the way, these guys can have it. I don't care. They're doing brilliant and good work. And I know that sounds patronizing, but I really don't care. Good. Let them have it. That said, before all of you jump on the bandwagon, as I know so many of you are inclined to do, look, yes, we did talk about this a lot before. Be happy that somebody else is finally paying attention.
Again, this is a legacy of the Soviet Union. So Soviet intelligence took over after the Comintern was abolished in 1943 at pressure from the Soviet Union's wartime allies, the United States and Great Britain. They knew what the Comintern was all about, and they said, wait a minute, we're fighting this war with you, not against you. Stop trying to subvert us. So Stalin said, oh yeah, okay, we'll get rid of the Comintern, but he gave the subversion mission to intelligence. So it continued. So the KGB formed, and the Committee for State Security formed in 1954, then took over that mission. And in the late 1950s, the Communist Party Politburo gave the KGB an extra mission and emphasized more what they called active measures. So active measures would be sometimes physical actions, assassinations, kidnappings, and so on, but mostly it was information operations, broadly defined. And they established in 1962 what was called Service A, which is part of the First Chief Directorate, or the Foreign Intelligence Operation, the KGB, roughly the CIA equivalent of the KGB. And these people had a wide-ranging set of missions and did a wide-ranging set of things. So they forged documents that would be given to Western newspapers. They planted stories in newspapers in places like India, for example, hoping that they would get picked up by West European and United States newspapers.
What kind of...
So before we let that pass, this is still relevant today, at least in my opinion. We see this kind of thing pretty often. The aforementioned hits on American servicemen that Trump didn't care about. That is exactly how we got that. Some foreign paper published it, and then it was reproduced by the Washington Post as a direct citation, as I recall. It's been a long time. I might be misremembering that, but this still happens a lot. We get a lot of foreign press says, and then just nobody fact checks it. Nobody bothers to check on the veracity of the claim in any way, shape, or form. They just say like, well, foreign press published it, so therefore we know. We see this domestically insofar as, I think Tim Pool, of all people, is most famous for complaining about how any sector of the media will publish an article about something, and then that article will just get cited over and over and over and over again, and no one will bother to check until it's almost impossible to find out where the story originated. So it becomes impossible to check because every permutation of the story changes just a little bit. And so you can spend days trying to track down the original article to find out who, sources were, what information was used in generating this article. And by that point, it's everywhere, right? This is, to the old cliche, the lie will get halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. This is exactly that, right? Over and over again, what do we find? Some vague story. And by the way, if you track these things long enough, you will eventually find, original article says something like unverified claim, Trump eats dogs, right? And then the next article you'll find is claim Trump eats dogs. And then the next article you'll find is explosive, scandalous claim. Trump not only eats dogs, but has favorite recipes, right? And why do I use Trump? Well, because all of you know who he is, and because he's the guy that these articles get written about most of the time. And so by the time that you find your MSNBC article or broadcast about it, it's, not only does Trump eat dogs, but he's been eating dogs since 1976 and has a whole cookbook that, I don't know, he's been passing around his family, or at least that's the claim. Now, what they don't tell you is that these claims have come from just small permutations, the telephone game of rewriting articles over and over and over again. And somewhere along the way, if you check those articles far enough, as you go through the line, I wonder if Trump has a cookbook for this, right? And that will eventually turn into, not only does he have it, but he's had it for years, and on and on and on. And for all those of you who rightly don't trust the media, this is why you don't trust the media, because these things happen a lot.
Stories, for example, like that the AIDS epidemic was a product of the United States Defense Department. So it was one of their most effective active measures operations.
So what? Let's just dive into that one specifically. So
before they do, this hits home for me incredibly hard because there is a very specific section of the internet that loves to tell me exactly that, right? Oh man, you don't even understand, like the CIA created AIDS and it just exists to, I don't know, do whatever it is that, fits whatever list of conspiracy theories, which, look, my guys, I love them. I do. You don't get to find out that birds aren't real without loving conspiracy theories a little. So, and if you don't get that, by all means, just Google it. Google will tell you birds are not real. We needed COVID to replace the batteries. Still, maybe they're not all correct. That's all I'm saying.
They they get a story into India's media.
Yeah.
And they hope that we pick it up?
Right.
Why would we pick up what India media?
Because it's a good and interesting story. But it was not a sure thing. So the Soviets had other things that they would do. So they would write stories and feed them to sympathetic journalists who would then publish them verbatim. What they also did was publish, in essence, notes This is the message we want to get across, point A, point B, and so on. And I then give it to you. So I'm a KGB agent, you're my asset. I give it to you, and then you write up my message in your style. So it doesn't look like a KGB product anymore, but you're passing on the message. So again, a wide variety of approaches that were used to provide a consistent general message, but one that would not be obvious. So what they did.
Some of you, speaking of love of conspiracy theories, are indeed going to say, sounds like Operation Paperclip to me. This sounds a lot like one government competing with another. And I got nothing. That's what it sounds like to me, too. So, Alex Jones was right. It is an information war. It's a war for your mind, and it's one that is being waged by governments. What you want me to do there? So, yeah, okay, this is true. But again, let's keep track of what's being said here. This is, we're feeding, the KGB is feeding these things to papers in India. They're feeding them direct assets that are in American papers, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole organization here, right? And it should not be overlooked that there is a very large organization doing this, and they kind of do. They just kind of skip it like that doesn't matter.
Was develop techniques that were designed specifically to be long-term in goal, long-term in duration, that would be subtle, that would be complementary, and would be hard to both identify and combat. So it was a very effective program. And they actually came up with a name for it back in the 1950s. They call it reflexive control. So you're trying to get. So I'm trying to get you to do what I want, but you need to not know that you have been influenced by me. All right. So that has worked very well for the Soviets, and the KGB officers who defected, who were involved in active measures campaigns, have said repeatedly, it really was very easy to fool Westerners, to fool Americans. These are people, gullible people, and they particularly were fond of targeting political liberals, not hard conservatives and not hard leftists. And again, go back to Willy Munzenberg's innocence clubs. They wanted to create a lot of allies as part of the effort to subvert the country, the country as a whole. And
so. And maybe I'm just full of confirmation bias today. I typed out a lengthy, obnoxious, autistic Twitter post about confirmation bias and how we are all full of it. So, by all means, throw my words back in my face, as the internet loves to do. However, I find this to be a decent retelling of what happened here, right? We should know by now that a lot of the information of the past, say, 40 or 50 years at bare minimum, and decently far back beyond that, is just propaganda that's washed through mostly time at this point. We've all had the opportunity to see it evolve in various places, whatever it is. That's our favorite thing to go research. You go back 20 years, you find one view on a thing. You go back 20 more years, you find another view on that exact same thing. And you find it not just from the same outlets, but sometimes the same person, right? Where you go, well, wait a minute, you're the guy who told me this over here and how you absolutely knew how things were going. And now here we are 20 years down the road, and you're telling me that not only were you wrong, but you were so wrong that it's this other thing that I now just have to accept, right? This is it's happening right now with Kamala Harris, where, she's talking about how a video that I caught today, 5 years ago, was the border's secure, and we're, we are so happy with how secure the border is, and it's just great, tremendous, amazing. And then you flash forward to a campaign speech she made like last night, and it was, well, if as your president, I will secure the border, which, hey, look, Okay, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Forgive me if I have doubts, but this is that game being played. Don, how likely and to what degree do you believe domestic and international intelligence agents understand their own histories well enough to not be inadvertently functioning against themselves? Basically none. At this point, as much as I despise the phrase that history is a set of lies agreed upon, for most people, that seems to be the case. I don't even know that I am not one of those people. I'm not here to tell you that I'm infallible in that way. But when you look at any number of these people talking about whatever it is that is historically relevant to what they're doing, it's very easy to find things, if you are even aware of the historical context, where you're like, well, look, man, that and this can't be true. So which is it, and why do you think what you think? And what I generally find personally is they have no reason why they think what they think. Somebody told them that, and that was good enough, and they don't want to bother checking. And at that point, what you're talking about is it being an agreed upon set of lies. So obnoxious. It is personally one of those things that I think is used at this point to just say history is whatever I want it to be, which just means that we're no longer agreeing on the set of lies. But insofar as it's true that we will tell ourselves lies and then use those lies to justify things in the future, yes, history is indeed a group of lies that is agreed upon. Moving along.
And their argument was that it was relatively easy to subvert, to fool liberals for two reasons. One, liberals were generally sympathetic to the Soviet view, but not wholly in the Soviet camp. They weren't communists. And secondly, because they were generally sympathetic, they didn't ask a lot of questions about sourcing, about accuracy.
Interesting.
So they found that it was
Straight to the problem I was just discussing.
easy to fool liberals. And what they also did, importantly for what's going on here now in 2024 on the campuses, is that they worked the universities. So they were pushing materials on the universities.
The Russians were.
So yeah, Soviets, and now the Russians are doing it too.
How are they manipulating our schools today?
Okay, well, we get through ads. I'm just going to talk because, hey, look, go watch Shawn. In general, personally, I enjoy the show. I know that makes me a Fed, and that's okay. I don't mind. I've been called a Fed a lot of times on the internet, but love you or not, buddy, I'm not just replaying your ads. So, look, there is plenty of good stuff to go watch on his channel. You absolutely should. I can't imagine that a guy with 3 million subscribers needs little old me to tell you how to find him. He will come up in YouTube search results, whereas I often will not. Though, I note the long break from the internet has gotten rid of a lot of the shadow banning, so hopefully, as I continue to create content over a lengthy period of time, that won't matter anymore. We'll see. All right, back to this discussion.
Well, the governments of these countries, I think, are at this point are not. So they influenced enough early on, so that they were able to get enough friends, if you will, either committed Marxists or fellow travelers, to now do this on their own. To back up and go a little bit different direction, if I might, but a complementary way. There was a group.
So before he goes off on the tangent here, right? We've long talked that this is not the Soviet Union for obvious reasons, that there isn't a Soviet Union. But he's already verging into the, but now they're just this autonomous being. Well, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you there. They're not an autonomous being. And that should be pretty clear, even if the only thing that you want to talk about is George Soros-funded DAs, which they will get to later, as I recall. That's not autonomous, right? It is not just some like, well, we created a partisan force in this country and now we just left it to its own devices. That is very much not true. And it's not only not true, it's, given what this guy is talking about, I fail to see how you could come to the conclusion that it is true. But he's going to make that statement overtly in a few minutes here. So let's let him do it.
Group of people in the teens and 20s and then in the 1930s, good Marxists, wanted revolution, wanted that good perfect world that Marx promised, but realized that the economic conflict that Marx had talked about was not going to work. So as you recall, Marx postulated that there were two competing groups in the world, capitalists and workers, the proletariat. Their interests were incompatible, and that at some point the proletariat would overthrow the capitalists, and we'd have a perfect world forever. Well, the problem was that workers didn't see the world the way Marx did, and they said, "Gee, capitalism seems to work pretty well for us too. We can, if we contribute here, we can do better for ourselves and for our families too." So by the 20s, good Marxists were saying, this original Marxist plan is not working. So what we need to do is find other ways to divide people and
So I'm not going to hate on this guy for skipping over a thing that I have put a lot of time into, but if you've been here for a long time, specifically if you've seen the Fabian series, you know this started long before the 20s. The end of the 19th century, you've got the Fabians starting to put together a whole lot of how do we show the proletariat that Marxism is good for them, that socialism is good for them, because they don't seem to be getting it. There's a whole book that they wrote. They had sort of a founding fathers, let's all just submit documents to each other, and that later got compiled into a book. You can find that book on the internet. I've linked to it any number of times. These people knew factually long before the 20s. Now, maybe his argument, it would be better phrased, to be generous to him, as here in the United States, it's not happening in the 20s. But the Europeans already knew this. And we know that because the Fabian Society was created, and their objective from creation was people are not accepting Marxism, so what we're going to need to do is figure out a way to teach them, trick them into not only accepting Marxism, but deciding it's a good idea and have them go out on their own and campaign for Marxism. And the most notable thing, because it has been so popular for so many years at this point, is socialized medicine, right? I've covered this any number of times. There's a whole article by one of the Fabians. Forgive me if I forget who. I haven't looked at this document in a long time, but telling people that if what we do is create socialized medicine, then this will teach people that seizing the means of production is a good idea because they're getting all this output for it. And if you look to Europe right now, or at any time basically in my lifetime, you can find them, as the internet so aptly demonstrated to all of us Americans during COVID, you can find them treating the NHS like a religion, right? And so it's pretty clear that not only did the Fabians have a point, but they were good at what they did. You don't have to like that, but, respect your enemy insofar as when they're good at something, you better watch out for it. For those of you who are Americans thinking like, oh, hey, we're just so much better than that, what we did in the United States, because socialism and socialized medicine were so horrifically unpopular in the U.S., is we created Medicare. And as of a couple of years ago, somebody released some documents saying that at the time Medicare was created, it was going to do exactly what socialized medicine was doing for Europe. We were just going to take care of the elderly because Americans could look around and see that the elderly in some cases weren't being taken care of. And as soon as we convinced people that Medicare was a good idea, it sort of begs the question, well, if this is good for the elderly, why isn't it good for you? And the answer to that over time has been the VA, which is probably, and I say probably because I don't know, another example of how we're going to teach people that socialized medicine is good. Primary problem with the VA, vets hate it. So it's not doing the job very well. But Medicare is out there until we get to Medicare Part D anyhow, and people get very upset then. But Medicare had been out there for a very long time teaching people like, well, hey, if the government does the insurance thing and we just have all this stuff out there, then like, yeah, it absolutely is a good thing. So much so that I've had an endless supply of people tell me like, well, the most popular government program by any metric is Medicare. And you can tell me that if you want, but that is not a question of efficacy. That is a question of, do you enjoy getting something for free? And as long as they have the rest of us to tax to make something free, then yeah, it probably does seem pretty good. This, on the internet, is generally how we get to criticizing the boomers, because the boomers are indeed currently the ones benefiting from Medicare. I have seen any number of people of that age group tell me that Social Security is not an entitlement, even though it is, objectively so. And their reasoning being, well, but we paid into it. Yeah, but what you paid into it has no bearing on what you get out of it, right? And this is the same kind of mentality. Social Security was sold to the American public as it's going to be a retirement savings account, and then whatever you put in, you get to draw out. And then when they passed the bill, what did it say? No, we're socializing the cost of retirement, right? And so what have we done with that? We have taught people that seizing the means of production of retirement is a good idea. And if you're somebody on Social Security right now and you're listening to this and you're raging at your computer or your phone or whatever it is, I'm not here to tell you that you're not benefiting from Social Security. You are. That's not the question. The question is this socialistic? And the answer is yes, right? It is indeed an entitlement. What you get out of Social Security has no bearing on what you put in. Now, some of you are going to say, oh, but it's based on, whatever your last paycheck was or last 2 years of paychecks, this, that, and the other. Okay, so if I go work for minimum wage for, 35 years, and then for the last couple of years before I retire, I somehow or another walk into a $200,000 a year job, are my 35 years of minimum wage going to be accounted for in what I get paid for Social Security? No. All right. And they're just not. It's an entitlement. And I know that's painful. I know many of you are thinking to yourself, well, but Don, I didn't do that. And you're right. You probably didn't. You escalated in responsibility and pay throughout the course of your career. And so to you personally, it seems less like an entitlement. But if I told you, and this is true, that immediately after Social Security was passed, there was a lady who worked for precisely one paycheck and then collected Social Security, it would bring into stark contrast how much it is not at all related to whatever you put in. Because one paycheck of Social Security is clearly not paying for all of your retirement. That's just not the case. All right, back to the show.
Generate the kinds of conflicts, the kind of conflict that Marx envisioned. So, in other words, get to the Marxian state a different way. And the way they propose to do this is through social means, through societal means. And fast forward a lot of ways. Basically, there were 5 areas that were targeted for efforts to again subvert the old Western capitalist way of doing things and help generate the Marxian nirvana, if you will. 5 of them. Education. Why? You want to go after young minds. It's a relatively effective way of converting people, either all the way or at least getting sympathetic allies. And it's relatively cheap. The young people of today are the leaders of 20 and 30 years from now. You have a long time horizon. You're trying to do this in a subtle way, so you go after education.
So he's absolutely right here. This is basically why I have such an issue with the coming, and it is coming, but there's no conspiracy to it. There is an assumption that it just goes unsaid here, that all of this got put together, and then once the Soviet Union fell, like everyone just forgot who their friends were, and that seems silly. And we'll get to that and expand on that more whenever it is that he gets around to making the actual claim, but it is indeed coming. Before that, though, indeed, there are two reasons to be doing this, and one of them is this. I indeed am being prosecuted and or persecuted by the federal government, so by all means, if you have the money, can donate, are willing to donate, I absolutely appreciate it. If you leave something on the donation page, we will try, probably more like at the top, bottom of the hour, I want to say. What are we talking about here? At the bottom of the hour, I'll get the comments that are on this page. We'll address anything that's over there, or at least anything that I have anything to say to. If you can't donate, yes, please share. I have had it said to me any number of times that the list, the number of prayers on here are mighty short. So by all means, if you can't donate or share for whatever reason, that works too. By all means, I accept prayers too. Thank you very much to everyone who has donated. No, I am not in any way trying to be ungrateful for those of you who have done donations and sharing up until this point. I really do appreciate it. It has been a wild ride on that front to see how supportive any number of you have been. It's really honestly been great and kind of in a life-changing way. So thank each and every one of you for anything that you have done so far. I really do appreciate it. I get to sit here and beg for you to do more, which I am not particularly good at. So with that in mind, let's get back to what we were doing here and get back to any number of claims that are about to be made.
You're targeting the press. Basically the same argument. You're going after the law because you want the law to begin to operate in your favor. You're not looking for scales that are even. You're looking for the law to favor you. Right? Fourth one.
I feel like we skipped one there, but he indeed is right. This is what the internet has dubbed anarcho-tyranny. It's very exciting. I'm happy that we all have a brand new buzzword about this. It is worth examining what they were doing when they were creating it. If by some miracle you are not aware of anarcho-tyranny, it is exactly what he's talking about, right? The law produces the outcomes that I want. My friends get taken care of. It's how you see people in Seattle have all their charges dismissed, and at the same time, I'm here running a multi-hour stream asking for donations to a Give, Send, Go so that I can take the federal government to court and not just go to prison and hang out in the DC gulags. So it is a strangely apt juxtaposition given where we're at.
Fourth one is religion. So you want to get rid of, you want to destroy organized religion, because organized religion talks about an alternative world incompatible with the Marxian world.
Oh, wait, I think it wasn't done there.
So religion is a core enemy of Marxism. And the fifth one.
Okay, so yes, that's true. I would suggest that it's a little bit bigger than what he's talking about here. If you are spending your time in basically any religion, the idea that you surrender all things to the local government is pretty much anathema, unless, you live in Rome or some part of the Vatican or something like that, right? Because the local government is the church, right? A lot of the issues that Marxism has with every religion is that this idea that you should become some servile slave thing to man is not indeed a good idea, right? And Chad is rightly bringing up you cannot serve two masters and be loyal to both, right? That is indeed the Christian answer. But since we're zooming out a little bit past Christian here for the sake of Marxism hating religion, the idea that you should be peaceful and a Buddhist and all of the, there is honor or any of these things, right? It doesn't matter where you go. Religion will conflict with Marxism heavily. And so totalitarianism doesn't tolerate the conflict.
As a family. So you want to destroy the family unit where people look out for themselves and their spouse and their children. They're looking for the future of the family. You want loyalty in a Marxian state to be society-wide. Your identity is not to the family, it's to your group.
So, again, it's a pretty good description. This is, if you were going to base all of society on how you engage with work, which is what Marxism does, right? You know, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, it's how you engage with work. Are you in the leadership of work, or are you in the subjugated masses? Just ask the Marxists, they'll tell you. Then, yeah, of course, you can't have, well, you know, my dad's a landlord, and what he does is he looks after his tenants and he tries to take care of them as best he can. So I'm not sure I believe all of your propaganda about landlords being terrible, right? You know, I rented a house from a guy many years ago who was talking about, you know, when 2008 hit, the guy that he was standing as middleman for had a company, and the guy went to his company and he said, "Hey, we got two options. I can fire about 25% of you, or we all take a pay cut, and I'm going to leave it up to you guys as to what we do." Now, whether or not you want to come to me and say, "Don, that's Marxist," like, well, look, you know, it's his company, he can do what he wants with it, and whichever is the existentially right idea is irrelevant. Once that is forced, right, once it's compelled, like, hey, man, I could use this opportunity to cut the 10% of the workforce that is dragging me down, right? And maybe you've got 10% of the workforce that's dragging you down, and you've been trying to bring them up, and now you just don't have the money anymore. And so, like, hey, you're the dead weight, you got to go, so that all these guys who are producers get to maintain their job, get to maintain their lifestyle. Maybe if you didn't want to be the first one cut, you should have been laying it down 6 months ago, 2 years ago, whatever it is. Maybe that's the right choice in that moment, right? But the Marxist doesn't have that opinion, right? The owner shouldn't make that decision. There isn't anybody who does less. There isn't a 10% that we were trying to drag up when we had excess money. You're just a horrible person because you run a business. And that unto itself goes to some, you know, equality nonsense of yesteryear's discussions, and we could be at that for hours. But for the moment, let's just get back to the various claims here.
All right. So the mechanism then is that you've got information operations, broadly defined, going after all of these 5 areas because they are impediments to the Marxian revolution.
So it is the press, the education system, the law, the family unit,
and religion. Right. And
we're
all
seeing
5 of those are under significant stress in the United States at the moment.
That's what I was just going to say. We've been seeing this happen for quite a while now. Right. So,
well, and so this begs the question, right? You know, why are we still seeing this? What is the driver? And I don't think that question gets sufficiently answered. Again, I'm just going to hammer the hell out of this because it's kind of a problem in what's being produced here.
How do we do this in other countries?
No.
We don't?
No, nothing close.
Nothing close.
For many...
So, man, I don't know, and I don't want to be particularly ungenerous to this guy because he's pretty clearly just, you know, telling his opinion, in my opinion. I understand that you, the internet, are not going to be forgiving in this circumstance, but I'm going to try to be generous here. That is not true, okay? On at least the YouTube channel, there are still places you can find it. You know, we went over the coin manual. The coin manual is not a horrific paraphrasing of Russian active measures, okay? For those of you who don't know what the coin manual is, it is the counterinsurgency operations manual for the war on terror. We did the vast majority of this. Now you can come to me and say, Don, but we didn't tell Islam that it can't exist. And you're right, we didn't. What we said is Islam has to be what we want it to be, which I don't think is a greatly functional difference in this circumstance. You could say that we didn't go after the family, but part of the counterinsurgency operations was how to manipulate family dynamics so that we didn't end up creating more terrorists. Right? I mean, it's not. Is it precisely the same? No. Right? But does that make, do we do this in other countries? No, obviously we don't. An honest answer, I don't think it does. Now, again, I don't know whether or not he knows. I don't know whether or not he's making a comparison. I don't know whether or not he has at any point stumbled across the idea that we have used any number of these tactics personally for any number of years. There's plenty of evidence that we did lots of this in Vietnam. There's some evidence that we did this in Korea, and that, to some degree, as the tactics matured, we ended up with a counterinsurgency operations manual for the war on terror. Again, it's entirely possible he just doesn't know. Okay, but if you don't know, then, I have some problems with your assessments, because you're missing pretty big pieces of information about what's going on here. Now, again, when I said, keep in mind what his resume is, high-speed, low-drag operator type. Now, to be fair, is this guy doing on-the-ground counterinsurgency things? Probably not, right? High-speed, low-drag operator guys, much more shooting in the face, much less give the kids soccer balls and food and what have you. Now, I say that based exclusively on any number of these guys that I have talked to, and they do not have a lot of stories of like, yeah, man, we were hanging out giving these kids cookies or MREs or, you want to go find out who was building schools, go talk to the CBs, right? And so maybe this guy just doesn't know. Maybe it is just a hole in his knowledge. And I don't think that is some inherent condemnation of him or anything like that. But understand that, when you're listening to this guy, his lack of this information is probably coloring a lot of what he's saying there. And he doesn't have to be perfect. I know, dear internet, everybody needs to be perfect all the time. And if they're not, then we know they're a fed and whatever else. But for the moment, let's pretend like we can listen to the guy and not need him to be perfect. That should be acceptable, even if it's not generally to you.
For a number of years, CIA was the agent. Well, back up even before that, right? So before World War II, we had nothing close to a coherent, foreign policy. I don't think, frankly, but certainly we did not have anything close to an influence operation.
So, standing in the 21st century and looking at 19th century foreign policy, I think you could make that claim if you look at 21st century foreign policy and say that's a coherent foreign policy. Now, first of all, I'm not sure that's true at all. But second of all, we did have any number of coherent foreign policies. And as the fat electrician will tell you, for the most part, that coherent foreign policy was don't mess with America's ships, right? As the Marine Corps will tell you, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, right? Those are not domestic battles that the Marine Corps engaged in. Those are foreign policy discussions at the barrel of a gun. And what was it? What were the reasons for those things? In a sense, don't mess with America's ships, right? Now, if you are looking at post-World War II, the global order consensus nonsense, and that is the standard and definition of coherent foreign policy, then don't mess with our ships is not, that's not even in the same ballpark, let alone, the same game. So, okay, maybe, but again, this should tell you a little bit about who you're listening to, right? Because I find don't mess with America's ships to be a perfectly coherent foreign policy and one that I'd rather engage in almost every day of the week. But here we are.
CIA was created, as you know, in 1947, and in the 40s, 50s, 60s, there were some operations that were conducted that by Soviet standards were crude and simple and small. So we've had public release of information that CIA helped publish some books, for example, and made some pamphlets and contributed to non-communist youth going to conventions in Europe and so on. But by Soviet standards, this activity was trivial, and as best I can tell, almost all of it was ended in the mid 1970s. So Congress got a hold of some of the real abuses of CIA and FBI in the Army in the 1960s and said, enough, we're not doing any more of this. So CIA, as a good bureaucracy, said, we're not gonna do things that are gonna get us into trouble with Congress. So they've basically quit doing this. So.
Okay, so this is the internet. I know how that's going to land. I think it would be generous to say that's naive. Now, look, in the world of, is this guy closer to it? Maybe he knows better than me. Maybe. But there are a lot of things that have happened. I mean, is the CIA sending kids to, I don't know, conventions or something? Maybe not. If you can look at Ukraine right now and not see, and you can complain to me that, oh, it's not the CIA. Fine, we have diluted to some degree the CIA by having 50,000 different intelligence agencies. So it's worth noting that this might be a difference in colloquial term intelligence agencies vice the CIA in specific. Fine. I don't think that really gets to the heart of the matter, though, right? Are we doing this? Yeah, objectively, we are engaging in this sort of thing in foreign countries. And you can see that with, Lindsey Graham and the intelligence agencies supporting the war in Ukraine, publicly even, right? Now, this is not commentary on whether or not the war in Ukraine is a good idea or a bad idea. We'll get to that later. This is just, we can see it happening right now. Again, you can, but Don, that's the NSA instead of the CIA. Like, I don't know, maybe it is. Don, that's the Defense Intelligence Agency instead of the CIA. Okay, maybe it is. Does that defeat the point? I mean, only on pedantry grounds. And if we're defeating the point on pedantry grounds, then I think we're losing.
So the malign influence operations are basically being conducted around the world by states that want to change the system. So you have Norway, for example, that says, gee, we'd really like you to know about our salmon industry, or where we got great hydropower and we're a green country and so on. So they have some, in essence, propaganda operations to let the world know about what Norway's doing that's good. But that's a fundamentally different thing than what we've been talking about.
Again, we can dive into this as though a little while ago this was propaganda is printing pamphlets, right? And that for some reason we're going to differentiate between printing pamphlets and social media. At bare minimum, right? Everybody's doing this, right? On the propaganda front. And maybe part of the problem here is just lack of ability to look at us, right? But when we talk about how the United States is going to help somebody do whatever they're doing, or when we go out and pay for foreign countries to have DEI programs, which we have done, okay? Is that not an information operation? Is it were we just going to call this bribery? Right? We're imprinting that administration's values on somebody else. Are we going to have the argument that hey, Ukraine will help you fight a war against the Russians, but what you had better do is have any number of propaganda classes that we're funding, but you're teaching, right? Again, either this is a massive hole in knowledge, or, and to be fair, this may all just be brushed off by those who don't know any better, those who haven't gone and read these documents, right, who hasn't seen these releases as, that's just crazy, it's going too far. I caught, I want to say him and Rogan discussing Trump and how he's just over the top because Trump would say they're eating the dogs, right, in Springfield, right? Well, okay, well, You can complain to me if you want, but there's a lot of pictures and video out there of them eating local wildlife, including dogs and cats. So, is he being over the top? And look, is Joe Rogan out there scouring all of these things all of the time? No, but if you're going to tell me that that's being over the top, then he better be wrong, right? And he's not wrong. So, and to be fair to Joe Rogan type and Shawn, that's who was talking there. Maybe he is right about this. Well, he is right about this. And if you're part of the portion of social media that pays attention to politics to some extreme degree, you know he's right about this because you've seen the videos, whether you wanted to or not.
Man, I don't know. I'm not. I have a feeling the agency has its hands in this, but.
You know what? It's the bottom of the hour. So what we should do is we should come back over here and we should find, as soon as I can find it, live editing, best kind of thing. No current donations, so that ought to be easy. But we should find this guy. Again, part of what we're doing here is indeed that I need to go to court and fight the federal government. So I know a lot of you are into the process as the punishment part of the world and all those sorts of things. Maybe that's the case. And if that's a good enough motivator for you, then that works for me. By all means, I do need to raise money to pay for the legal defense to go fight, to not just spend the rest of my life in a DC gulag. I don't know if the rest of my life is an accurate description of whatever it is, but they're going after me. And so, yes, indeed, I do need to raise some money for legal defense things. So again, if you have any amount of money, and I do mean any, yes, literally $1 helps. I appreciate it. If you could donate to this, if you can't donate at the moment or at all, or you hate me and you're mostly just laughing at something bad having happened to me, by all means, share the gifts and go around so that you and all of your friends can laugh at horrible things happening to me. Maybe one of them has a kind enough heart to donate some money. I'd appreciate that. That said, let's get back to the shenanigans.
But
let's come back to that when we talk about the politicization issue, because that's been asserted. And my view is that there's a relationship, but it's not quite what's been asserted publicly.
So I got another question. I mean, we're not just looking at the Russians here. We're also looking at, China obviously has a big hand in this.
Yeah.
And well, actually, I'm curious, before we dive into that, we know Russia is involved in this against us. We know China is involved in information wars against us. Is there anybody else that we should be looking out for?
Well, two big ones are big ones, but not as big, are Iran. The Iranians are doing information operations by many standards. A lot of it through cyber operations, and the North Koreans are doing some too. So here you got the big four intelligence targets of the CIA now, publicly identified, going back 5 years ago now, and they're all heavily involved in information operations as well as nuclear weapons and conquering other countries and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily find that to be a terrible target list, all things considered. None of those people are particularly happy with us at any given point. Us being Americans, specifically the American government. That said, and maybe I'm just being overly dismissive here. Forgive me when I don't look at North Korea and see them putting out anywhere near comparatively what everybody else on that list is putting out. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm just missing it. I find North Korea an interesting subject, and I don't find the impact of them in propaganda. And to the point earlier, maybe it's just a hole in my knowledge. Maybe I don't understand how big of a deal this is. But there's a thing that he said there that is kind of a big deal. The 4 targets of the CIA information operations. Well, do we have targets of information operations or not? All right. Because a minute ago we didn't do any of this, and now we have targets of information operations. So I'm not sure which one you want to go with, but I find the juxtaposition of the 2 points interesting. And maybe the answer is, well, but we don't do those specific things. And I feel like that, again, is a pedantry answer.
And we discussed the 5. I'm surprised, where would social media and cyber operations fall into in those 5 categories?
Well, they would be these were the old Soviet ones now, right?
And so this may be will be a 6th.
So well, these would be the ways that you create a turmoil in capitalist society to generate the Marxian revolution. Well, the Russians are not Marxist, are they? Putin, authoritarians, yeah. Russian nationalists, yep. But they're not Marxist-Leninists the way the Soviets were. So a lot of what the Russians are doing now, borrowing the techniques and in terms of forgeries, in terms of getting information to friendly journalists and so on, but their goals are different. So Putin has pretty clearly got a Russian nationalist agenda, restore the territorial empire that horribly, from his perspective, horribly was lost when the Soviet Union collapsed. So how do you?
So this is one of those things that I remain a little doubtful on, and only a little. I don't think Putin would turn away from the opportunity to have the old Russian Empire be his. I don't think it's not part of the goal, right? So maybe I'm just being a pedant now, but I think the assumptions that get made based on, but Putin wants to go recreate the old Soviet Empire, cause a lot of problems, right? I don't think the war in Ukraine would have gone the way that it's gone if Putin was actually just trying to retake all of Ukraine. This is generally where we get to, but that means the Russian military is inept, and maybe that's the case. Maybe we are just watching 2 retards fight. I won't argue about that. That seems at least very possible to me. That said, at best, we're watching 2 retards fight for the sake of, Putin wants to go recreate all of the old empire, because he just stops at very inconvenient times for this kind of narrative. And maybe it is, maybe Putin is just holding on to, 100-year view of this, and like he's going to set up all the things that recreate, the old Soviet Empire. And maybe that's the case. And I just had too short of a timeline or any number of those things. But again, the American intelligence assumptions that come out of like, oh, but, he's going to try and take all of Ukraine in the span of 2 weeks just don't materialize, right? They never actually show up. And it seems to be almost exclusively because of this kind of assumption that, but Putin is just trying to recreate the empire, so he's going to lay siege to all of Ukraine in the span of a week and a half. Like, well, but is he? Because we're pretty far in for that to be true by now.
To do that, you're targeting then groups that are opposing you, for example, in Ukraine. So that would be the European Union, that would be NATO, and that would be member states of those countries. So you want to generate divisions. So pretty clearly, one of the big targets in the United States is to use information operations.
So right on to the Putin wants to recreate the empire, causing problems, right? Now, maybe they're right. Maybe that's the case. But if you have an agreement with a guy for 40 years and then you break the agreement, generating some reason why he's the bad guy after you broke the agreement is just dishonest. Now, whether or not this guy knows there was an agreement, whether or not it's a functional agreement, which is what all the pro-Ukraine guys are there to tell you, is, this was a back of the napkin agreement. It wasn't a treaty. Like, well, still an agreement, right? And so if you break the agreement, then big surprise that the person you broke the agreement with is like, well, then I guess the agreement's off, so I'll just go take back the portion of Ukraine that solves my problem. Did I mention that they're also harassing the hell out of ethnic Russians, which, hey, look, Putin's a Russian nationalist. I don't find that to be an unrealistic reason to have dealt with at least some portions of Ukraine. This doesn't mean that I think Putin is telling us all the truth about everything. It can be true that both sides are doing dishonest things, and probably is. But that said, we started that. Whether anybody wants to agree with it or not, if I have an agreement with you that I won't punch you in the face, and then I punch you in the face, when you hit me back, who did that? I did that, right? And that's exactly what happened here on a political level. Again, you can generate all the excuses in the world. Well, but if Ukraine wants to join NATO, why shouldn't they be allowed to? Well, because we said they wouldn't be allowed to. All right, and that was the agreement. But something super duper libertarian argument, people should be able to do what they want. Well, okay, maybe, but if you break the agreement that was in place previously, you can't be surprised, even if you want to be upset, that the other side is not holding to their end of the agreement. And that's exactly what happened here with this, hey, NATO won't make one more step towards Russia. Oh, by the way, not only did we make 50 steps towards Russia, but now we're bringing it quite literally to Russia's door. Shock of shocks that they were not pleased with that. And again, to the pedantry argument, a lot of people are going to say, like, well, that agreement was with the Soviet Union. I've seen that before, too. In which case, Russia had no requirement not to invade Ukraine. They could just do whatever the hell they wanted, right? And so I don't know what we're complaining about, because we no longer have a duty to defend Ukraine if the agreement was with the Soviet Union, and therefore, the agreement is null and void because after the 90s, there is no Soviet Union. Well, then why are we defending them? Because the thing that we said was we're defending them because of the same letter that says, hey, if you go after Ukraine, we will defend Ukraine. Also, NATO won't march. It won't get one step closer to Russia. Like, the whole thing is just propagandistic nonsense. And if we were being honest, we probably wouldn't be involved at all, which they're going to get to later.
Basically active measures again, but now you're trying to generate removal of support for Ukraine in the United States. Social media is a key way to do that. The people they're targeting are Republicans. So you remember I mentioned earlier that the Soviets found it easiest to target liberals. Mm-hmm. The Russians are going after conservatives in the United States, in Hungary, in Italy, several other European countries too. Again, basically to divide, to break the consensus of these big alliances that are really unwieldy in the sense that they require unanimity to make major decisions. So if you can break the unanimity, then you can break support for Ukraine, for example.
And I am sure, being as that was quite literally the next sentence, oh, see, you've just been a subject of the propaganda. Well, look, maybe. I'm not here to tell you that I am immune to all things propaganda. What I am here to tell you is that whether you like it or not, Putin does have some points. He does. And those points are verifiable. They predate him and his authority in any way, shape, or form. And we had a lot of years of holding to that agreement. And so there's not some reason that Putin should believe that we're not going to hold to the agreement. Now, Maybe you've got your reasons, dear viewer, whomever you are, this guy, if you ever, John, if you ever happen to see this, maybe you've got your reasons why that shouldn't be the case. Be that as it may, right? If Putin is holding to the agreement because he thinks there's an agreement, and you come by 40 years later and go, oh yeah, but there was never an agreement, or there hasn't been in 30 years, well, what exactly should Putin do about that? Because, by the way, his answer in that case should be, well, then, first of all, why do you care about defending Ukraine? Second of all, look, if there's no agreement, then who the hell cares if I invade Ukraine? It's not your business. You're not part of the treaty, right? And the only answer to that effectively becomes, we're Team America World Police, which, whether you like it or not, a whole lot of the conservatives everywhere across the world are getting tired of. No, we don't want to go spend blood and treasure for Iraq, right? Why do we care? It is becoming a serious question. Whether you like it or not, it is indeed becoming a serious political question within the United States, why it is we should crusade around the world on these foreign wars. Now, you can tell me that this rules-based post-World War II order means that we should be Team America World Police all you want. A whole lot of what the country is telling you is we don't want to be. So is the only reason they're doing that because something foreign propaganda, or did we bury a lot of our sons and then watch the President of the United States check his watch when one of them came off the plane, or 13 of them came off the plane, right? And go, oh man, we don't matter to you at all. And none of this mattered. And you were willing to create this disaster that was Abbey Gate and the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Maybe we shouldn't do this anymore, right? And it is hubristic at best to say that, well, the only thing that's causing this problem is foreign propaganda, because there's very good reasons why people don't want to do this, right? And even if you want to forego all of the very clear and obvious reasons, like not wanting to bury your kid for a war that didn't matter and you have come to hate anyway, which many, many people have, which I believe they'll cover later in this particular episode. Look, man, the Patriot Act is not working out for a lot of us, right? The weaponization of the entire intelligence agencies, or the entirety of the intelligence agencies against Americans is not working out for us. And lots of us, whether you like it or not, see that as a byproduct of the war on terror, right? So should we all be happy that, those conservatives who are generally out there telling you how the Constitution's a great thing, they love the founding of the country, oh, by the way, we're circumventing all of it because of these wars. What, they just have no interest in this except for foreign propaganda? That's silly, right? And honestly, I don't think should be treated with much reverence, because it is indeed silly. Now Chad is here rightly pointing out that it could be both, and I'm not precluding it being both, right? If you see division in an opponent's country and you just go support one side of the division, that makes information operations a lot easier, right? Because, well, hey man, they're organically creating their own division. How about if we just help the side that, I'm not going to kid you, probably isn't going to win, right? And so that just keeps the division perpetual, because if the conservative portions of all of these countries had the capability to overthrow what their government wanted, they would be doing it, right? And so if you want to keep the division going, you support the side that looks like they're losing. You help them out as best you can so that they keep going. You need to keep the small faction motivated so that they keep harassing their government, and hopefully that causes problems that you can capitalize on later. And that's entirely possible. It's not, an unrealistic theory in my opinion. But the problem is this is getting dismissed by this guy as like, well, but it's just a foreign influence problem. No. Make no mistake. I have overtly told my son not to join the U.S. military. Ever. All right? And that's not because I don't love the Marine Corps, because I do love the Marine Corps. It is because of exactly what we're talking about here. I don't want to send him to Ukraine to fight the Russians. I don't want to send him on the next war to Iraq, right? And look, you can think whatever you want, and I know how the internet is, building 7 on and on. We're going to go on a wild tangent in about 2 seconds. I don't think Afghanistan was wrong, and I know But bin Laden was just a puppet, and it was all just, I got it, right? But again, given what it was at the time, fine, we're going after bin Laden. I know, Tora Bora, this, that, and the other, all kinds of things to discuss. That said, okay, fine, we go to Afghanistan, we say, hey, you don't want us to show up and break things again, leave us alone. And unto itself, that is information operation things, right? I get in its own way. You tell the rest of the world, like, hey, look what happened to Afghanistan. We showed up, we broke things. You don't want to, you don't want us to do this. Then don't do terrorisms in our country. Now, you can argue about whether that's right, wrong, or otherwise. I don't really care. That's fine. Well, Dawn, if we never would have let this happen to begin with, then wouldn't have been a problem. Okay, fine, I got you. That doesn't change that if you're going to engage in Afghanistan, and again, I don't inherently think it was wrong, then that's the way it should go, right? For those exact reasons. Now, in relation to this guy, though, how can you be surprised on the far end of 20 years of war that turned into a disaster that people don't want to just inherently commit to another war? That is so incredibly out of touch and blind that it's difficult to quantify for me.
That's interesting. Now, I'm interested, let's stick with the Russians. They've been at this for well over 100 years.
Yeah.
They would have some very deep ties into media outlets and writers in the media world, correct? Mm-hmm. I mean, long-standing assets. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't they continue? I mean, if they started this on liberals and now they're transitioning to conservative media, wouldn't they have to? They would have to get in here, create all new assets in a completely different sector than liberal media. Why wouldn't they, as they're developing those assets within the conservative media and the conservative space, why wouldn't they continue to try to manipulate the liberal
Oh, I think they
side?
probably are. I think they are. But the most important, thinking about the current, roughly the current situation, as best I can tell, and a number of people who follow Russia more closely than I do indicate that, the current push is Ukraine for obvious reasons. It's a major demanding war on their part. So who is prospectively a thorn in the side of NATO and the European Union? It's conservatives.
Oh, no, I 100% agree with you. I mean,
they're what they're doing. Remember, this is a long time program, right? Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with lots of avenues, some very subtle, some not very subtle at all. You're constantly developing new groups and new approaches based on your needs.
Yeah,
so I don't think it's an evolution, not a requirement for a wholesale change.
I feel like trying to manipulate conservatives to be against the Ukraine, against U.S. funding Ukraine for the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit for Russia. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And
you've had a dramatic change. I mean, can you imagine Ronald Reagan comes from the grave? Can you imagine him agreeing with what many of the House Republicans have been saying about Ukraine? I mean, he'd be flabbergasted.
Yeah.
So that's insane to me. And maybe I just have some sort of misapplication of Reagan, but the only way you can come to that conclusion is if Reagan was just after the Russians, despite that Reagan any number of times said he was after communists, right? So once the Soviet Union falls, presumably Reagan is less interested in what Russia's doing. And we'll never know. But that was at least the claim at the time. And this goes back to a complaint that I've been hearing for years. Oh, you're just a cold warrior, blah, blah, blah. Because the internet likes to dismiss things, and that's fine. But you have to make this conflation that Reagan was after Russia and not the Soviet Union. And I don't think that's clear. I think that is, it makes a good argument in the moment because it supports what he wants, which is how you get to this statement.
Who's the rhino here?
Yeah.
Right. So, hey, you should be for perpetual foreign wars because Reagan would have been, which, look, supposing that Reagan would have been, am I not allowed to disagree with Reagan or, I'm a Republican in name only or any of those other things? And no, that does not inherently mean I'm a Republican. But even if that's the case, let's take that as true, right? The Republican Party was founded almost exclusively to overturn slavery. So I guess what we should be doing is overturning slavery in the United States, right? Because if we're not doing that, then we're rhinos, right? That's the kind of argument that's being made here. And it's just self-evidently silly if somebody points it out. Now, look, I'm not here to tell you that people aren't going to, sell their arguments in the way that's best for them. That's fine. That's how a lot of this, discussing in public goes. And I'm sure I'm guilty of doing precisely that any number of times. At the same time, if you want to tell me that the only thing that, and to some degree, this is what he's saying, I'm going a little over the top here to demonstrate the point, but the only thing that ever matters in relation to what the Republican Party should do is what Reagan said, then you're going to have to explain to me why Republicans think the Hughes Amendment was a bad idea, because Reagan signed it, right? And so I don't think that is exactly what we should pin all of our hopes and dreams to. This goes to a thing that the Republican Party has been criticized for a long time about in any number of sections of the internet, which is to say that, Reagan's not God, okay? He is fallible too. He could have made mistakes too. Whether or not you agree with him is indeed up for debate at any given time. I don't think what we should do here is say that, the only thing the Republican Party exists to do is compare themselves to what any given interpretation of Reagan thinks is correct, because that produces this kind of statement, right? And I don't think that's correct in any way, shape, or form. Presumably, Reagan also would have said that NATO advancing towards Russia was a bad idea because he made an agreement that we shouldn't do it. But that's acceptable. That's a good idea. That's what we should be doing. Why? Something. I like it right now. That's an incredibly dishonest view of this. And by the way, this is why guys don't trust. This is why the plebs out there don't trust any of these guys, right? Because if Reagan signing that agreement should be the guiding principle. How close to Reagan are we? Then we're in the wrong. Right, we're violating Reagan's agreement, as I recall, and any number of them, right? Like the short-range missile thing, all that other kind of stuff, right? We have violated lots of agreements that Reagan signed. So clearly, we're the bad guys. If the only thing that we're measuring against is whether or not Reagan was correct about everything, so it's very convenient to say that Reagan went toe-to-toe with the USSR, and therefore he would think that we should support Ukraine. But 10 minutes ago, when you told me there was no USSR, presumably that would also be relevant to what Reagan would think. And here's the deal. I don't think that this is inherently malicious or anything. There's a very high likelihood this guy's never thought about any of this. And you need to understand that that's the case with a lot of these people. I run into this thing where people go, well, but I think Reagan would have thought this. And well, but what Reagan did was precisely the opposite of that. Why would you think he'd think that? And oh, I didn't know that, right? And maybe, and again, I don't think we should measure everything against what Reagan thought, but you are. So as long as you're doing that, then, well, when we advanced NATO towards Russia, that made us the bad guys here. Right, because Reagan thought we shouldn't advance towards Russia. So, look, understand that there's a very high likelihood that this guy is not inherently just the evil that's ruling over the world. Blah blah blah. We'll get to why I think that later, but that he just has no idea. You know, he's never thought about this. He's never had to think about this. It's never been presented to him. And maybe that does or doesn't change his opinions. And if it does, that tells you some things. And if it doesn't, that tells you other things. But to the internet's favorite point, just hate these people and get, walk away. This is why there are no allies in anything, right? There's no attempt to talk to people who at least superficially agree with you on any number of topics, and so everybody alienates everybody. I understand why the internet gets looked at as just full of trolls, because that is often the case. Dear internet, there are plenty of times I think you're right and have good ideas, but you're just dicks to everybody. Stop it.
Yeah, but as far as, so we have four countries that are key players in the information wars against the U.S.
At least.
Do these four, the four biggest, do you feel like are they all in this together at some point? I mean, we know they all have their own agendas for whatever reasons, but do you think behind the scenes they are also, even though they have specific agendas that they want to push into the U.S., are they also allies?
Okay, so before we get to the answer to that question, it is that time again. I'm going to learn to shill. It's going to happen, right? We're working on it right now. That's all I'm saying is it is indeed. Well, thanks. That was just what I was looking for. Good looking out, OBS. Boomerisms will continue until morale improves. Just deal with it. It is indeed that time again. If you can donate to the Don the Pleb Legal Fund over on GiveSendGo, which is indeed givesendgo.com/Don the Pleb. My wife has set up a legal fund that hopefully will cover my defenses in fighting the federal government in court for January 6th related charges. If you can donate, I would very much appreciate it. If you can't donate, please share this around. The simple reality here is that going to court against the federal government costs money, and I certainly don't have that much. So I know there is deep lore of the channel that I am grifting tens of thousands of dollars off boomers. And sadly, my bank account is not reflective, so I can't just go to the federal government and throw money at them because for some reason the deep lore is wrong. That said, the one other thing I should do, as long as we're here and in promotion of this, over on Rumble, yes, if you are on YouTube, this is being streamed to Rumble. Yes, they're getting it ahead of you because you're just getting a rebroadcast stream of what's on Rumble. The gym plays for $2 for the R&D budget of the beard holster. That sounds a little like a mask, and I'm not excited about that, but no less, we'll start working on a beard holster. I don't know what that's going to look like. It's probably going to happen after going to court in D.C., because the simple reality is that is basically eating all of my money at this point. Once again, if you are donating over on GiveSendGo, then at the bottom of the hour, I will check donations and messages and answer them accordingly over there, as I do any other pay chat at any other time that I do such a thing. So with that in mind, let's get back to the thing.
Well, I suspect they may cooperate in some respects, but in the information arena, they have a public. I mean, not public. I mean, they have an obvious similar goal to damage the United States. But do they need to cooperate to do that? No, they don't. So that's just pretty obvious. So they're doing their own things to damage us, to damage our foreign policies, to damage U.S. capacities to be a world player and so on. And this gets back to, again, the Marxist in the United States too. I mean, so remember I mentioned social, cultural Marxism. So you've got lots of the 5 different avenues. Everybody knows what the general plan is, but there's no coherent guiding force that says you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do something else. They all know what the overall plan is, and people can then pick their little niche and push in a way that's roughly consistent with the overall agenda.
What are some?
So that's a real specific claim right there, right? Is there an who is the final boss bad guy kind of discussion, right? Oh, there doesn't need to be one. And that's true, but it gives a pretty misleading view of this, right? In my opinion. And the reason for that is this is early on in discounting the global conspiracy thing, right? But is Xi Jinping handing down orders to Seattle? Probably not usually. All right, that's fair enough. But the implication here is that all of the discussion of the Chinese, which he will get to later, building the Confucius Institutes and all these things, are not handing down guidelines to say where to go and how to do it, right? And that's just simply not the case, as he will cover later, right? But in the strictest sense, is Putin or Xi or the WEF, are they handing down dictates in a way that the military would understand orders being handed down from SecDef that get all the way to Private Screwball? No, right? But the implication of that, the way this is phrased and the subsequent claims on the subject are that this means there's not global conspiring. And we see the global conspiring, so I don't understand how you get there, right? There is some very, very silly view that this needs to function like the army for it to be a global conspiracy, and I don't see where that requirement comes from. Other than, well, we made it up because that means there's not a global conspiracy, which I don't think is a very charitable view of it. Or maybe it's just simply that, in the American view, it needs to be like a corporation or like the military or something like that, because that's how we envision conspiracies. But we know that's not true, right? We know that's not how all conspiracies work, right? And we know that from terrorist cells in the war on terror, right? At no point was the head of the Taliban talking to every single terrorist cell, but that damn sure they were conspiring, right? And the premise that is not a conspiracy, right? The premise that this is, all of those terrorist cells are totally autonomous. We know that's not true. And if we didn't know that, then why did we prosecute the war in the fashion that we did, right? And that doesn't get answered by anybody, probably because it's a question that other people besides me don't tend to generate. So if you watched this previously and you generated it, good on you. Nice to know that there are at least some other people out there taking a look at this sort of thing critically, which is ironic because that is a thing that they will cover later that we don't do. So with that, moving along.
Some things that people are seeing on an everyday basis right now that is part of this information war.
That the United States and Israel are colonial powers, and that the decolonization movement, which is a Marxian argument, that you need to have the United States and Israel decolonize the rest of the world. So this basically is right out of part of Marxism. Vladimir Lenin years ago talked about imperialism and colonialism and so on. It tracks very well. Edward Said was a Marxist who pushed the colonial aspect. Another one that's very...
So, welcome to Pissing Off the Internet. My name's Don the Pleb, and we are here to do precisely that. Look, he's not wrong, right? The mud decolonialization thing. Now, here's the problem. earlier we were making statements that rely on the assumption of Team America World Police, as far as I can tell. Well, here's the deal. If we're playing Team America World Police, then what we have done is created a system in which the Marxists were right. And that's a problem, specifically for me. I don't want the Marxists to be right about anything ever, at least as often as possible. They should be wrong, and to hell with them. However, if America needs to even just financially support Ukraine because Ukraine is in a war and a big country invaded a little country and we know that that's bad, then suddenly they've got a point. We are treating Ukraine like it's a colony of the United States, or that we are the global enforcer of order. Right now, if that's the case, what's the functional difference? Right? What's in practical application? What's the difference? And there's some mechanical differences. We're not actually stationing enough of a military in Ukraine that we are fighting the war. But if it's colonialization or colonization, but 10% different than it was done by, say, the British, then well, man, they do have a point. And I don't think we should listen to them about how to solve that, or what the brilliant communist answer to whether or not America is doing something wrong. I don't care what they think. To hell with them. But at the same time, maybe we should examine that honestly. Maybe we should examine whether or not Team America World Police is a good idea. Maybe we should examine whether or not it's a good idea to send a couple $100 billion to Ukraine while millions of people are streaming through the southern border. Maybe we should care about this country more, which, by the way, is why the conservatives are fertile ground for, hey, stop supporting the war in Ukraine. And look, you don't have to like that, but it's true. There are real problems going on around here, and a lot of us know it, right? And so, yes, we are more concerned about our country and what's going on in our country than we are whether or not Ukraine gets a mud hole stomped in its ass by Russia. And you are not going to change my mind about that, right? But Don, if Russia takes over the planet except for the United States, then they're coming for us eventually. Maybe that's the case. And maybe you want to tell me we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but we're walking over there and we got gum all over the ground and a giant mess over here. So until we can chew the gum, I don't want to be walking over there. I don't care about over there. I care about here. And no, I don't think that's wrong. I don't think caring about my country first is more, morally unacceptable, right? And it's very nonsensical and silly. Some of you are rightly going to say that this is a huge neocon point of view. And by the way, I find that to be the case. He just sort of tacitly promotes a neocon point of view here. He doesn't actually come out and say that we need to land troops in Ukraine or whatever, but he's friendly to the neocon point of view. And I don't think that's right. And part of the reason I don't think that's right is because Leon Trotsky is the progenitor of the neocons. Whether you like that or not, he wrote a bunch of propaganda, while he was out in Cuba, as I recall, that he sent to the United States that generated the neoconservative movement. It is inherently at its base a little bit communist, and I don't like that. I don't need a global revolution as enforced by the United States. I want a United States that is not full of communist nonsense. And again, very good chance he has no idea that that's the case. He has no idea that while he is out here crusading against some part of communism, he's enforcing a different part, right? Because nobody talks about this. And that's fine. You don't inherently have to know everything. That's, perfection remains not the standard. But at the same time, when you come to me with this, I see it. And you can tell me I'm a crazy loon that, I'm just talking out of my ass. That's fine, but you're going to have to explain to me why we didn't have neocons. Trotsky wrote a bunch of documentation for conservatives in the United States, and then we had neocons who were all following the documentation that Trotsky wrote. I'm going to need something that breaks that loop for me, because right now it looks pretty clear that this is a communist problem. It was a method of enforcing the global revolution as designed by one Leon Trotsky, and I don't want that either.
Very common is the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that have been adopted by the Biden administration, pushed by the Obama administration, basically ignored by President Trump. This comes right out of critical theory, another one of the cultural Marxist views that was developed in the 1930s originally by the so-called Frankfurt School. So critical race theory, critical legal studies, critical pedagogy, which you're using to indoctrinate teachers who are then indoctrinating school children. So on everything that's got a critical associated with it is Marxian in origin.
Interesting. What?
You heard it here first. Critical damage in D&D, Marxist.
And DEI is right out of critical race theory.
So this is very much a snowball effect.
Well, yeah. So it's continuing. It's going on, and then arguably it's achieving widespread, large-scale successes.
What's coming next?
Well,
So it's an interesting time, and to have said that out loud. Now, I know by nature of any number of other guests having said when their episodes were recorded that Shawn does not necessarily publish these things on the day he records them, or even necessarily close. And so maybe this was recorded quite some time ago. I don't know. But at a time where lots and lots of DEI departments are getting shut down, where they're losing court cases that say that they can't operate in this fashion, it's very strange particular moment to say that they're having great successes. I mean, they have had a lot of great success, and some of that success is coming to an end. I don't think that it's gone, or any of the other silly things that are going around the internet of like, oh, we're just done with this now. We're not done with this. It's still going to be going. 1 second here. But I do think that at bare minimum, we're in the fight in a way that matters, right? Which unto itself is a thing I spent many, many years telling people needed to happen. So I'm pretty excited about it. In a minute here, he's going to reference Chris Rufo. And look, whether you like Rufo or not, he has had a lot of success fighting these things. Now, granted, it's mostly in Florida, but he has. And equally, a lot of the societal pushback is gaining a lot of success, right? That doesn't, fight's not over. I'm not saying that, they aren't going to get new ground in any number of places, but what I am saying is it is a strange time to be saying that they currently are having a lot of success.
that's a good question. I mean, a number of people are talking about civil war at this point, aren't they? And clearly also, a number of people have said, gee, I'm finally beginning to realize what's going on here, and this is unacceptable. So they're fighting back against it. Now, whether this now counter-revolution, if you will, this is what Chris Rufo calls what's going on, a counter-revolution against the Marxian revolution that's been underway for decades now. So whether this counter-revolution will succeed or not remains to be seen.
So there's so much here that's not particularly good takes, in my opinion. One, the question that was asked didn't get answered. What comes next, right? And maybe the answer there is, I don't know what comes next. And that's not a wrong answer, but it's one that makes you not seem like you know what you're talking about, so I understand why people don't want to say it. And he kind of dances around, I don't know what comes next. And so I don't want to speculate, or, this is solely my speculation, or whatever it is. But look, man, if you're looking around and you're thinking that civil war comes next, I don't think that's true. That we're well past the point where And by the way, if it does, it's not coming in relation to this. For anybody who's saying, oh, well, if they steal the election, screaming at your phone or computer or whatever. If they steal the election, then maybe okay, but that'll be related to stealing the election. It won't be related, like DEI will have been some passive bump in the road, related only tangentially, right? Because clearly, no matter how many years I sat and listened to, well, if they ever come for the kids, then, that's it. The boog is on. Well, they're coming for the kids, and the boog is not on. So you can think whatever you want of that, but that's just true. And the issue that you run into, right, is that, well, okay, maybe the counter-revolution does its job, which is to say, Rufo and law and lawfare and what have you. But that's what's happening now. That's not what's coming next, right? And so, look, man, if you don't know, just say you don't know. Because the way that you present this makes it sound like the thing that's been going on for, in his own words, decades, right, is what comes next. Well, presumptively, if it's been going on for more than my lifetime, it's not what comes next.
The revolution is, as we were talking earlier, the Marxist revolutionaries have been quite successful. Mm-hmm. They know what they're doing. They're tough customers. So the people who want to fight them have got quite a battle ahead of them.
When it comes to manipulating the legal system, how are they doing that?
Well, you infiltrate the law schools, and you create people who are Marxian in outlook. You have then people who are appointing judges, for example, who agree with you. So that's a whole point of manipulating the flow into the legal system, is that you get ultimate prosecutors, you get and ultimately then you want judges and decisions that are consistent with your view. So we have prominently now a number of depending on your perspective, either really good or soft on crime prosecutors.
So this again is somebody asked about history in chat quite a while back, and this is the kind of thing that just instantly informs me that you have no idea what the history of the law in this country is, right? Because if I was to tell you that the Eighth Amendment had been used for most of a century at this point to go soft on crime, you might say to me, what the hell are you talking about, if you have no idea what the history of the law in this country is? But right, Scalia used to talk about this a lot while he was alive. It is pretty self-evident that the death penalty is not cruel and unusual punishment, because at the time of the founding, it was the only punishment for felonies, right? But there's a bunch of Supreme Court precedent from back in the Warren Court days that says, the death penalty is cruel and unusual punishment. Well, how did we get there if this is a modern problem? Because the Warren Court is not a modern court, right? And it hasn't been years and years now, right? In fact, to return to the discussion of Reagan, that's where we get John Roberts. That's the post-Warren Court, right? And maybe the answer is, Dawn, but the 80s is modern. The Warren Court that was that way for 50 years or whatever it was, that pretty well removes us from modern. Unless, of course, the only argument is that this sort of thing, modern means post-World War II, and this is the problem with using these flexible terms or this very abstract discussion of when the problems occurred, is that you don't have any idea of the magnitude of the issue. You don't have any idea what it is that you're going up against. And the implication is that George Soros caused all these problems starting in about the 70s, and that is just not true. This is why I have railed against Wilson for years and years, because Wilson set up this idea that we're going to have, in the words of Soul, these philosopher kings who are just going to tell us what the law is. And he is around the time that you start seeing infiltration of these institutions in any real and practical way. He facilitates it here in the United States. Man, we're going back pretty far to overthrow this mentality. We're going back pretty far to actually do this counter-revolution thing. And again, in a way that I think people just don't want to be self-effacing about what we're talking about here, right? There is stuff that facilitates all of this neocon idea that he seems relatively friendly with, that is older than all of us, including him, right? And, but Reagan is where we should pin this to. I don't think so. Reagan is many, many years down the road into this revolution, as he described, back in the 20s, right? And that is just fundamentally unaware that directly prior to the 20s, you had Wilson, who was pretty openly having the debate, is communism, or what would eventually become fascism, the right way to rule in the modern era, which, again, his time frame, it was modern to him. And that was kind of a global discussion at the time. And we like to pretend like that never happened, because later World War II happens, and then fascism, obviously bad. America didn't engage in that. The left is, of course, here to tell you that, not only did America engage in that, but we engage in it all the time ever since. And I'm not going to kid you. Again, I don't want these people to be right, but when you have these regulatory agencies, it's a fascistic method of governance. You don't have to like that. You don't have to think that we're, inherently a fascist country because of it. But we are duplicating the methods of government of fascists. And for all the unironic fascists in the modern world, I hope you're enjoying your trial run of fascism, right? I know you don't think so, because you only think that fascism means opposing transient kids. But look, man, that's not a discussion of governance, right? I know most of you can't separate those things, but that's okay. There's actually a method of governance discussion here, and that's not part of it. So what is part of it, right? Hey, we're all moving in one direction. What do you think all of these, Green New Deal ideas are? We need to mold the whole country into, the idea that we have green energy. That's the fascistic method of doing it. Whether you like it or not, that is where that premise of governance comes from, at least post the 20th century. You can argue dictators prior to that all you want, but that's what we're doing. So, and again, the ignorance of American history, I think, causes this problem, right? Which, again, is ironic given who we're talking about and what they're saying.
Around the country, most, if not all of whom, have been elected. George Soros has been providing a lot of money to support these people's campaigns and so on. So here you've got, through the prosecution side, you've got, in essence, a manipulation of the legal system, and that a lot of people who are Marxian in orientation say, we don't care what some of the law says, we will differentially enforce that which we like.
So when it comes to manipulating the legal system, there's more than one avenue. So there's the seed that has been planted from 100 years ago that continues to snowball.
Yeah, in different
ways. Got
into
our education system, right. People that were in school being educated to become lawyers.
Right. Another one
are now graduated. Some of those are teaching the next generation. Right. Some of those are actually in the legal system as prosecutors, district attorneys, judges.
Right. Some of them are in the federal government administering the law through regulations.
So again, I find that we just don't understand the scope of what's going on here. And that's probably because we don't teach modern history at all, right? Some of them. Are you insane? Hundreds, thousands of them are there. I guess in any given sense, the group of them, some portion, yes, but it is a huge majority of the people doing the things that you're talking about. And the problem is we're through so many permutations that there's a decent chance that when these guys started paying attention, they saw that things were as they were, and they saw the change, right? Well, what they don't know is that by the time they even saw what was going on, we're through 10 permutations of what these people want, right? So much so that, again, because he was so expansive in how much he spoke, Scalia was happy to tell you that when he first entered the law, before you could become a judge, you had to go out and practice the law. You had to have an understanding of how the law worked and practical application. And by the time he was on the Supreme Court, there was this idea that if you had been practicing law, you were polluted by the practice of law, and you should be very pure in what the schools had taught you, because that way you weren't corrupted yet. That's a big change. Right, practical application matters, and not a little bit. Right, this is where you get the real experience of doing whatever you're doing. And I don't care what the venue is; it is just the case that practical application matters. But if what you want is the purist theorist who is going to enforce their third-party ideas on what the law should be, you can't have them out there getting that practical experience. You can't have them out there engaging with the law as it was yesterday, because they're going to learn why the law has been the way that it was, right? And it is just the case that, again, within the lifetime of these people, right? John here has probably no idea that change has occurred, unless you go listen autistically, I understand, to a bunch of Scalia talks about the law and how it's evolved over time. You don't find this little thing. And why would you, if you weren't, me or a lawyer or someone who this was particularly relevant for, right? Or in some way of personal interest to you. And I'm sure it's not, right? That's not a requirement of life, but when you're going to go out and talk about this and stand as sort of subject matter expert, like, when you leave this out, it gives an incredible misperception of the problem. It makes it so people think, oh yeah, man, well, this is a post-Obama problem or a post-Clinton problem. And it is most certainly a problem post those people, but it is also a problem pre those people, and not by a little bit.
So when
another venue.
So is there direct communication from? So we have the entity that started 100 years ago. That's a snowball effect.
Right.
Now we're also talking about Soros-funded prosecuting attorneys.
Right.
And we're talking about. So, is there a direct line of communication from? Do these attorneys realize they're being manipulated, or has it just come through campaign funding?
I don't think they know they're being manipulated. I think they understand the general plan.
Okay.
And they are doing their part to help it succeed.
So they've been recruited.
Yes.
So are they an asset of Russia?
No.
So before we get to the asset of Russia discussion, right? Where did they get recruited from? Right? And it's a more than reasonable question that we just gloss over, right? Yes, there is some momentum to this thing. Yes, we have created these people through the school system over the years. Yes, these people are now somewhat of an entity unto themselves. But what is doing the cohesive movement here? And there's this idea that he's sort of referenced a few times, like, well, it's just everybody knows to move in the same direction. But there are coordinated attacks. You can see them, right? The prosecutions of any number of people at local levels, right, that all kick off on the same day. The bannings on social media, and some of that's the federal government, some of that, any number of places this could be coming from, but they are in fact coordinated, right? Alex Jones doesn't get kicked off every major platform on the internet without coordination, specifically not when it all happens on the same day. That's ridiculous. To be fair, maybe the answer here as well, but that's a different thing. And there definitely is coordination there, but in this arena, there's not coordination. Well, if that's the case, then how do we get, the Weinstein brothers becoming popular with all of these protests that kick off all on the same day, all over the country? How does that happen if there's not coordination? Is it magic makes it so? BLM riots in 30 different cities on the same day? I don't think so. All right. So, and maybe the argument is, but there are groups that are coordinating, but there's not that much coordination at a higher level, right? Well, we can see that much coordination at a higher level happen too, right? So BLM riots all over the country, and just conveniently Antifa shows up, right? And not only does Antifa show up, but we've got guys who are going down there with cell phone network analyzers going, not only are these people coordinating in what amounts to terrorist cells, but they are talking to other people who aren't here. We know the coordination is happening. However, if you're unfamiliar with this, if you haven't been running a political YouTube channel, news channel for the past most of a decade, maybe you're not. Right. And that's fine. Maybe you're not, but but there isn't coordination. Advertising your ignorance is probably not a good thing.
No.
Well, I mean, they can help, but they're not an asset in the way you and I understand that term from the intelligence world. So
to return to another point there, because he was mid-question, right? And he's sort of mid-answer now. Are they Russian assets? This is, again, the inherent conflation between Russia and communist, right? And it's getting danced around here in ways that I think are damaging to the conversation as a whole. Is there some implication that Russia is carrying on the USSR's goals? Well, if we listen to John here, not only is there not an indication, but the overt answer is no. So why would they be Russian assets, right? Now, are the Russians perfectly happy to capitalize on the destructive nature of all the things that the Marxists did? Yeah, probably, right? Hey, if America's going to tear itself apart over there and they can't project military or political power across the earth, that is beneficial to us. But under what circumstance would that make all of these Marxists Russian assets, right? Sorry, Shawn, but it's kind of a silly question in that sense.
Asset in intelligence would be someone who is to some degree controlled by a formal representative of a government,
okay.
Like a KGB officer would have an asset who would be in the Defense Department, hypothetically, who would be providing secrets. Mm-hmm. No, so they're not assets in that respect at all. They're allies. So if you think another way to think about this, and there are lots of different ways to think about this. This is pretty complicated, but the way I think of it anyway is that you've got people who are widely, going back to Lenin actually and Stalin. You've got party people, members who are either working for foreign government, working for the KGB, mm-hmm. or they are working within their own national context, working for the Communist Party of the USA, for example. But they are party members. They accept party discipline and party orders. You will do this, yes, sir, and no questions asked. These are almost military type organizations. First group, relatively small. This is the hardcore. Then you have fellow travelers, term that's been around a long time. So these are people who are generally sympathetic to the overall goal, but they're not completely on board. There are a few areas that they may disagree with, and they also don't want to subject themselves to the kind of discipline that a party member is subject to. And then the third group is the people who Lenin reputedly called useful idiots, and a term that I like better, Stalin's term. He called them naive dupes. So what you want to do is recruit a bunch of naive dupes to be, in essence, the foot soldiers of the revolution. So they're recruited by and they're helpful for. They vote for the goals of the party members and their closely related fellow travelers.
Okay, this is insane to me, right? You understand that this is the organizational structure. You understand that this method of organization has been around at least since Lenin, right? You understand that this makes the premise of direct coordination a little bit fuzzy, clearly, right? Look at his own description. It's not as clear that the useful idiots or the dupes are working directly for Moscow, right? Because they're not, right? But at the same time, you're gonna act like for global conspiracy discussion that they would need to be working directly for Moscow, right? Based just on what he said so far, and I may be conflating a little bit of what comes later, but if you know that this is the organizational method, then why would you set the standard as only the militaristic hardcore communists are the ones to be counted in, and that their direct org structure is what requires global conspiracy? That doesn't make sense to me.
So the people we're talking about now, the prosecutors and so on, they are not naive dupes. They are either the hardcore or they're very close fellow travelers.
So let's talk about the prosecutors. So are they, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when Russia or Soros or China or Iran, whoever, is trying to infiltrate into the prosecutors' space, they're not directly influencing these prosecutors. They're looking for people who align with their agenda the closest.
Yeah. In this case, but in the
already
case,
on.
They're already on board.
Now, what's amazing about this is what are we describing here, right? If we're talking just basics of leadership, we're describing decentralized command. Still command, right? And are they influencing the prosecutors? Again, we return to, you guys all drop charges on the same day in different jurisdictions, right? Somebody is doing that, right? Somebody is saying, on Tuesday, drop the charges, right? What is that? That's coordination, right? That's influence. Now, you can argue whether or not Soros is just the recruiter. He's the one that's spending the money, and it's not him doing the influencing. Okay, right? Well, maybe that's the case. Your local military recruiter is not actually handing down orders in the Secretary of Defense's capacity so that, Private Jones goes out and, secures this corner. But this premise that there just isn't influence because it's more convoluted than George Soros is a Marvel bad guy is ridiculous, at least if you are aware of any of the things that have happened that make it pretty clear that it's ridiculous.
So they don't really have to do anything but funnel money into their campaign funds.
Yeah, and the Chinese actually have a different, and I think in many ways, they're all sophisticated, but it's a different kind of sophistication. But their messaging is not so much, us against them. We want to break NATO, we want to break the EU, and for purposes of supporting Russian national interests. The Chinese have a more diffuse system. They're trying to not destroy the system and put in their own, but kind of mold it in their own kind of way. They use information operations in a very different way. So you've got millions of Chinese students, for example, around the world at universities. They're all assets of the Communist.
You're going to have to forgive me. I am, again, learning to shill. I think we're going to combine these two into one because it's at a 15-minute mark instead of a 30-minute mark. So let's return ourselves to here. we're going to go ahead and grab this guy, hit all of the refresh things. Oh my goodness. So for those of you who don't know, and some of you have joined later, so we're going to go over it again. For those of you who've been here the whole time, sorry, but this, this network is funded by viewers like you, and literally nothing else. I don't have ads to roll except, Shawn's, and I don't. But with that in mind, I am indeed going to court to fight the federal government on charges related to January 6th, and that is super expensive. So if any of you should happen to have a few of them spare dollars and are willing to donate them over there, I would very much appreciate it. If you can't, and I understand that we live in the economy that we live in, then please just share it around under the hopes that somebody does. For those of you who are unaware, there are links in the description wherever you are currently watching this to this Give, Send, Go. And if that is not good enough for you and you would rather just hand type it in, it is givesendgo.com/DonThePleb. It is the crowdfunder set up by my wife so that she can pay for legal expenses. Do you understand me, DC? Pound sand, you bunch of weirdos. And so in that vein, ideally, at any given time, if you all could do any of those donations or shares or prayers or any of those things, they would be very much appreciated. Realistically, any way in which that you can help that fund is, again, very much appreciated. All right, back to the shenanigans.
Party of China, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. So by law, they are subject to direction, to gather information, to disseminate information. They've got a massive operation here that is a very different sort of thing than the old Soviet system that was run by the KGB, for example. But similarity is what? You're using sophisticated means, long duration, lots of different venues, and you're trying to convince target countries to do things differently politically in ways that benefit you.
Okay, that's a pretty 100,000-foot view of information operations. In the sense that everybody is running information operations, I guess you could say that's similar. But and by the way, I don't think he's wrong here. I've been very critical of a lot of things that he's said, and so it's probably important to say that I think that's a decent assessment. They do very, very different things, partly in relation to having different goals, but only partly in relation to having different goals, right? In the sense that Xi and Putin do a decent amount of talking and seem to be perfectly happy, to be allies. It seems a little short-sighted to take a look at these two guys being allies and go, well, they're obviously not working together. Now, does that inherently mean they are working together at all times in all places? No, that's not what it means. But there are definitely times where, Russia will do things and that will not hurt whatever the Chinese are doing, right? And China will do things and that will definitely not hurt whatever the Russians are doing. And in a much more tangible sense that we all can see, when North Korea sends Russia a lot of munitions to use in Ukraine, North Korea has kind of been a vassal state of China since Mao. Okay, this should not be news to anybody, right? When we were fighting the Korean War, we fought the Koreans almost all the way to the Chinese border, and then the Chinese sent troops to Korea. There's lots of documentation about it from guys who fought in the war. And North Korea has been a vassal state pretty much ever since. And so if North Korea is sending munitions to Russia, then you better believe the Chinese gave the hominis dominus to that, because there's no way that Xi is going to let the ill family, Kim Jong-il, send munitions to Russia without giving the nod. It's just not going to happen. But we're expected to believe, based on what he's talking about here, that they are good enough friends to be working together to send munitions to the Russians, but not to function together in an information war. And I don't think that washes.
What are some things we're seeing China implement through this?
Well, for example, one of the things that's been done around the world, there was a big effort in the United States. There's been some pushback on that. They create what they call Confucius Institutes at universities, and now they've got actually have a variant of that that's going to secondary schools around the world. The last I looked, which was a little over a year ago, there were about 500 of these still in existence around the world at major universities in Western countries. So the goal here is you create a Confucius Institute, right? So Confucius, famous Chinese cultural person, at least he's famous in the West, right? But wasn't a Marxist, wasn't a Maoist. So Confucius is very much out in China. But because it's a useful name, you create a Confucius Institute here. You staff it with people who you find loyal. You provide a lot of money to greedy Western universities. These are very mercenary.
So that's an assumption that I just don't understand. And kind of a Marxist one, right? It's just that the universities are greedy. Well, didn't we just go over that there was a Frankfurt school and they were infiltrating the universities, and that, they are holding teaching positions and they are minting out these lawyers? There's no possibility that they're doing this as a next step of the funding? This assumption is insane. Hey, yes, we created all these communists and they took over the universities, but now these Marxists are only accepting this Chinese money because they're greedy. You've got to be kidding me. It's ridiculous on its face, right? What are the chances that these huge quantity of Marxists that are in fact infecting the schools and have been for roughly a century aren't at least somewhat ideologically aligned? That seems like a hard zero. But the assumption to justify the rest of the worldview is that, but they're just taking it because they're greedy, right? It's not an ongoing influence operation. Because reasons, I don't know what those reasons are, but we're just going to make the assumption that they're just being greedy, because that way, when I say there's not, there's no one handing this down, it doesn't conflict with what pretty obviously looks like an ongoing influence operation. I don't understand it. Again, the guy's not an idiot, right? He's spitting a lot here, and much of it's pretty good. But it's where you get to these little hinges in thinking that I go, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would you even say that?
Organizations. So if you get you make a pitch to them, gee, we're going to do a culturally useful thing. We're going to help you teach people Mandarin. This will help improve international relations. And oh, by the way, we're giving you a lot of money. Universities have said, grand idea, so we'll do this. So what the people who follow the Confucius Institutes are saying is that these are core influence peddling operations, and they also are espionage centers. So you've got Chinese citizens working for the state, whether formally or not, they are working for the state. And they are helping the Chinese intelligence services via businesses, via their think tanks, whatever it might be, to gather information in the United States.
Again, he lays it out immediately thereafter. Yes, this is an ongoing influence operation, but also, for some reason, I'm expected to believe that the schools that were infiltrated by the Frankfurt School are not friendly to this. And I don't understand why. Why would you make this assumption? First of all, why would you make the assumption? Second of all, why would you carry it on to such an extreme point that it starts to look ridiculous. And maybe the answer is it only looks ridiculous to me. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe he doesn't cover something here. Maybe we have had a giant inquest and put every teacher and teachers union representative who all for some reason behave in very Marxist fashion to I don't know, we brought out the thumb screws, and so we know they're not Marxists, even though they behave like Marxists every day. Why would we assume that this is just greed and not ideological conformity, where they're just picking up where the Soviets would have left off? And there's just no answer to this.
So this is a nice combination. So you can both do influence operations and espionage at the same time.
Wow. What would you say what is the end goal? Is it to get U.S. into a civil war? Is it to just divide every
Well,
way
the Soviet goal was to destroy the United States, as it was known as a capitalist, Christian, West-leaning, 500 years of Western civilization type of an organization. So the goal was to have a crisis. Whether it would be resolved by a civil war, a coup, or an election that would be the final election, that would be any one of those is okay.
So now we come to again a problem of not understanding American history, specifically in relation to the Soviet Union, right? That may have been the Soviets' goal, and I don't have any issue with that description, but we're leaving out some pretty major stuff here. Like, you're going to need to explain to me why we were having this Cold War, and during the time of the Cold War, we are subsidizing food to the Soviet Union, right? We seem pretty friendly to our opponent in that circumstance. Why are we creating these things that the Soviets find, or rather the Fabians find, to be the methods of teaching the populace that socialism is good, if this is as clear-cut as it's being made out to be, right? Why are the institutions that were created during that time frame still in effect, still being run by honestly crazy people? You want to have some fun at some point, Google the National Labor Relations Board and find out what those people do and who they are. They're almost all communists. They have been since the creation of the National Labor Relations Board. The Operation Choke Point and the FDIC, specifically the I forget what the name of the sub-organization is. They are all running around on this, are you doing communist things? And if not, we're going to cancel your bank account. So by the way, every time someone's bank account getting canceled gets brought up, it's this brand new thing. It's been going on at least since Obama, right? When that system was created, right? And what is that a duplication of, right? That is the Maoist, like, it's bad for your reputation, so we're just going to destroy you and remove you from society, right? And this is all just a massive coincidence, apparently.
But the ultimate goal was for this new communist state in North America to be subservient to Moscow. That was a Soviet goal. Russians different. So Russians' goal, what? They want to have restoration. Want to recreate the grand and glorious Soviet and Russian empires. So they don't need the United States to be destroyed. They just need the United States to be out or abandon or break NATO, because it's NATO that's protecting Ukraine and protecting the West Europeans.
Why? Why is NATO protecting Ukraine? Again, until we start breaking agreements with Russia, and covered earlier in the show, you can go back and look. There was an agreement that we would leave Ukraine alone, and so would the Russians. And then we break the agreement, and now Russia has a problem. We should have seen that coming, right? And NATO shouldn't have been doing this. So yeah, if I'm, again, this is not to tell you that anybody here is the good guy, but if I'm Russia, right, if I want to stop for a minute and examine what my enemy might do so that I can project what he would do in the future, for example, then yeah, running NATO into Ukraine's a bad idea. It's an idea that produces Russia going, well, I can't have that, right? And if you want to know why they can't have that, go take a look at the topographical map that includes Kiev and Moscow. And what you're going to find out is it's a big open territory between the two that you could just drive tanks across an open field. That's like saying that we would, let the Russians in the middle of the Cold War, or even the Russians now set up a base right next to DC, right? Or even just have a friendly territory right now. We wouldn't even, look what happened when they were in Cuba, all right? It wasn't close. We want to be much closer for a thing that we have much more influence in than they want us to. We had an agreement that we wouldn't do it, and then we broke it. Yeah, of course they don't like that. Whether or not Putin wants to recreate the Russian Empire, doesn't matter in this sense. But there is this assumption that this is a guiding principle of what's going on here. And that assumption, right, wrong, or otherwise, is used to create obviously silly outcomes conclusions along the way. And those conclusions create bad action, right? Like that we need to send hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. We need to send the GDP of multiple countries to Ukraine. No, I don't think we do.
Who, by many standards, I think including Putin's, are relative pushovers, with a few exceptions. The Swedes, the Finns, they're tough cookies, but some of the others are not worth worrying about. So you want to destroy U.S. support for NATO and for the general North Atlantic community, because that community is your enemy if you're Vladimir Putin.
Well, if this is the case, and let's just take that at face value for a minute, then what I almost effectively have to believe is that all of Europe is a Russian asset, right? Because you can tell me all you want that Trump is a horrible person for saying that NATO needs to be paying their fair share. But if what's really going on here, and it was, is that basically nobody is paying any amount towards NATO defense, then they are doing things that will destroy NATO. So Germany's a Russian asset because they weren't paying anything towards defense. Britain's a Russian asset, right? Because they are destroying, at bare minimum, the capability of NATO. So is that Russian influence too? That they, and these sorts of things start to become absurd if you just take them at face value and then look at what other agencies have done, what other governments have done, right? And you could tell me, oh, Don, that's dishonest. It's not breaking up the treaty. It's just making it incredibly worthless, right? And so the only option there left is that we play Team America World Police, which, again, neocons, Trotsky, we keep coming back to the same points because there's a worldview problem here that I don't think anyone bothers to address, basically ever.
How about China?
Well, the experts say the Chinese are not trying to mess with Ukraine. They're trying to say we are rising again, and we need to take our proper place in the world. We're far and away the biggest country, with India moving, a big country, and self-evidently our political system and our long-term culture and so on are superior to anything else. So what we need to do is reshape world organizations in ways that are Chinese, and we will guide, not control, but guide the renewed, the evolved, if you will, international system. So again, their goal is a little different than the Russians' is. Russian goal, as I understand it, very territorially oriented, very empire building oriented. The Chinese are more interested in influence. Although, I talked about the importance of sophistication and subtlety and time. Both Xi Jinping and Putin have been very belligerent lately, haven't they?
Yeah.
Certainly in Ukraine. So when you are more belligerent, then the influence operations get harder. So you've got a situation where the Chinese now are showing what probably are their true selves.
How so?
Well, in the sense that they're trying to push around the Filipinos, for example. They're talking about invading Taiwan and so on. In the 1970s, Deng Xiaoping, leader at the time, was reputed to have come up with a strategy that's been shortened to hide and bide. So you hide your goals, make China the dominant country in the world, and you bide your time until you are sufficiently strong culturally, militarily, economically, politically, and so on, to force these changes on the rest of the world.
Okay, so we finally got there. Yes, right, in some ways, yes, but this is the Chinese, when they, when World War II happened, told everybody that this was coming, right? And in the world of, they're picking on the Filipinos and all this other kind of stuff. This goes back to a 80-year policy. That's the One China policy. I mean, so much of this, well, I don't know, it might be longer than that. I forget exactly when they started that, but it's not new. And, so much of this stuff is, you're not wrong, but at the same time, if you're not talking about the Belt and Road here, what are you doing, right? And maybe the answer to that is, but it's not influence operations. You can't be serious there. Again, is the maybe it's not information operations is a better way to put it. Like, well, maybe, but you're now splitting a hair that I don't think should be split. Hey, we're coming in to tell you how to govern in a way that is incredibly beneficial to China. Oh, by the way, change all of your society for a functional government that is entirely beneficial to China. What are you doing, right? Like, you are running more direct information operations than publishing, an article here or there or whatever it is. But if we're talking about sophistication, right, like this is compared to publishing some pamphlets or something, right? This is substantially more sophisticated. And it's the kind of thing that when I listen to this, I go like, well, why are we having this discussion if you're not going to be getting this out there? And I think the short answer is ignorance, right? And it's not an exit. I hope the short answer is ignorance, because the other options are very malicious, right? And so hopefully the answer is just that he's ignorant of these things, and that, but if that's the case, then why are we talking to this guy? And one of those things that I probably ought to accept at some point is that by the time you get to, talking to me or listening to me or whatever it is, chances are good you've run across about 80 of this guy, and go like, well, hey, there seem to be a few problems. How do we get to the guy that is at least talking about what the problems are? And maybe that's the answer, is this is the publicly consumable piece of information, right? Or pieces of information. And that not understanding what has gone on in this country is so prolific that even though I find this to be inadequate, it's better than what was out there yesterday. Maybe I just get used to that.
So what some of the China specialists are saying is that the hide is not so hidden anymore.
Yeah.
And so this hide and bide strategy, which fooled many people in the West for several decades, is now much more in the open. That said, they still have massive information assets. The students are still out there. They still are providing funds to universities. They've still got huge press operations. They're providing funds to political candidates all over the Western world. So they still have huge assets in place, and they have some assets that the Russians and the Soviets for sure never had, business. So you've got this massively potentially anyway, profitable Chinese market, and the Chinese can say to a big international bank or a tech company or a manufacturer of some sort, you're welcome to come to this nice Chinese market. We'll be happy to have you if you operate in a way consistent with our political interests. So a number of the agents of influence now are Western businesses. The big banks, for example.
Wow. And tech.
Which the Soviet and the tech. Since it's China didn't, the Soviet Union never had that kind of asset.
I mean, pretty much all of our businesses.
Well, an awful lot of them operate in China, don't they? Apple, most of its manufacturing for a long time was in China. So they're really, they've got a noose around their necks, in terms of being susceptible to pressure from the Chinese. Now they're beginning now, as I understand, to put manufacturing plants in other countries, but they're still heavily committed to China.
So, if this is the case, then if we know that they're very heavily committed to China, if we know that the banks operate there and they're very heavily committed to China, if we know all of this, then when you say, I don't think there's anybody handing down orders, then what does heavily committed to China mean, right? Nobody is inherently doing this sort of thing. Well, what you're describing right now is people doing that sort of thing. And I think that this causes a whole lot of problems very, very quickly. Now, part of that is that if you're going to say, there isn't this big international push, and again, that comes later, but if you're going to say that, then when you describe the big international push, right, the big global push, as it were, it should be that people listen to this and go, well, wait a minute, which is it, right? Is nobody handing down orders, or is everybody heavily committed to China and China's handing down orders, right? And again, you can tell me, but that was only about prosecutors, right? Well, are the Chinese establishing these Confucius Institutes in already very communist academia and getting a lot of traction because everywhere they go, they're finding friendly people, or is it just that they're greedy? There's so much of this when you put two of these thoughts together that what you get is that doesn't make any sense. Now, I have good news and bad news. The good news is there will be more of this. Bad news is that I have long ago learned that turning something into a 20-hour stream means that nobody will ever watch it again. So in that vein, I'm going to break this up into, given how long this interview is, probably 3, maybe 4 streams. We'll see how that goes. Just because how much I have to say about what they're talking about is probably going to change. But with that in mind, this is invariably part 1, and we will get back to this. I will probably start doing these things on Saturday until further notice. Hopefully the regular show is coming back. I don't know exactly. Every time I put a date and time on it, something really wild happens. But I think for the moment, at least we can do this. So with that in mind, thank you all for watching. Before I get out of here, it is once again time to discuss the fundraiser here, because the simple fact of the matter is I have to go and fight the federal government in court, and that takes money. So if you can, please go over to givesendgo.com/DonThePleb and donate whatever it is that hopefully is not cutting your own throat, making sure that you end up homeless or any other such thing. But anything is appreciated. Yes, even $1. I am serious. It is, I know people say that, but the simple reality here is that, pretty much everything is beneficial because the feds just shovel money into the fire until you end up in prison, and I would like to not do that. So, with that in mind, if you can't donate, please share. Yes, everywhere. I have said a couple of times that I will go through, whatever donations have been made. So, Sniper for $85. I'm not sure what to say here. Just win. That's the hope. So, thank you very much. I do appreciate the donations. We will probably go through donations on stream every time I do this because I really do appreciate you guys donating. And I really do actually need it. I know, again, there's some people out there telling you that I'm not actually being charged. There's an update video over on Rumble. You can see the charge sheet. It is there. By all means, take a look at it. This is absolutely happening. Court dates have been scheduled. I've been a couple of times. It is just the case that, yes, one, they are still going after people for January 6th, and two, I am one of those people. So, with all that in mind, thank you all for watching. We will do some more of this. Hopefully, at bare minimum, this will teach you at least how I think about these things when I see them. And hopefully that is useful to you in watching any number of these long-form podcasts because, look, some of them are interesting and cool, and some of them, let's say, miss the mark. So hopefully I will see you all soon. I will invariably be shitposting over on Twitter /X/ whatever it is now at a slightly more regular rate just because I can do that without any prep time. So I apologize. The preparation is required for these sorts of things, and they do take clearly a lot more time, of which I find myself often short on. So on the way out here, share the stream as well. Tell your friends. I am indeed going back to regular content production as soon as I can get the court thing settled enough so that I can get back to this as opposed to talking to lawyers and doing all those other kinds of things that are suddenly very required in my life. So by all means, if you're new here, and you may very well be, do all of those liking, subscribing, and sharing type things because we're coming back, gents.